You will share my name, my title, and my wealth, but you will never have my heart. Those were the words Duke Adrian Blackthorne spoke on our wedding night, cold as the rain hammering against the windows, final as a judge's sentence. I was Elena Whitford, 23 years old, standing in a stranger's bedroom wearing white lace and shame, sold like livestock to save my father's crumbling estate. London's elite called it a brilliant match. I called it survival. But what happens when the woman they bought refuses to stay silent? When she stops playing the perfect, grateful wife and starts fighting back? Stay until the end to see how a marriage built on ice became a war neither of us expected. Like this video and comment which city you're watching from. The rain started before dawn on my wedding day and never stopped. It came down in sheets across Mayfair, turning the streets into rivers of gray muck, hammering the roof of St. George's Church like 1,000 impatient fingers. Inside, beneath vaulted ceilings and stained glass darkened by storm clouds, 300 of London's finest sat waiting. Waiting for me. Waiting for the spectacle. I stood in the vestibule, hidden behind heavy oak doors, listening to the organ's low rumble. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd expected them to shake, expected some physical manifestation of the terror sitting like a stone in my chest. But no. My fingers lay calm against the bouquet of white roses someone had shoved into my grip an hour ago, roses that smelled like funeral flowers. "You look beautiful, darling." My mother's voice came from somewhere to my left, thin and desperate. I didn't turn to look at her. I couldn't. If I looked at her face, at the relief barely hidden behind her powder and rouge, I might have done something unforgivable. Like scream, like run. "The carriage is ready after the ceremony," she continued, adjusting my veil with trembling fingers. "The Duke's staff has prepared Blackthorne House. Everything is—" "Mother," my voice cut through hers like a blade. Quiet. Controlled. "Please stop talking." She went silent. I felt her step back, felt the weight of her hurt, but I couldn't care about that right now. I couldn't care about anything except getting through the next 2 hours without falling apart. The music changed. The wedding march began. The doors swung open. And there he was. Duke Adrian Blackthorne stood at the altar like a monument carved from ice and fury. Tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that filled out his black mourning coat in a way that suggested violence barely contained. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that would have been handsome if it weren't so utterly devoid of warmth. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, eyes the color of slate, fixed on some point above the crowd, refusing to acknowledge my existence even as I walked toward him. 300 pairs of eyes tracked my every step. I heard the whispers. Of course I heard them. Poor girl. Quite a catch for the Whitfords, considering I heard her father lost everything in that shipping venture. She's lucky the Duke agreed to this. Lucky. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I kept walking, each step measured, each breath carefully regulated. My father stood waiting halfway down the aisle to take my arm, his face flushed with drink and relief, his hand shaking worse than my mother's as he looped my arm through his. "You're saving us," he whispered, bourbon-soaked and pathetic. "You're a good girl, Elena. A good daughter." I said nothing. What was there to say? That I hated him? That I'd spent the last 3 months since the engagement announcement feeling like a prize mare being paraded before a buyer? That every time I tried to imagine my wedding day as a child, it had never looked like this. Like a transaction, like a surrender. We reached the altar. Adrian didn't look at me. Not once. He stared straight ahead as my father placed my hand in his, as the bishop began his droning sermon about duty and sacred bonds. His palm was warm, his grip firm but impersonal, like shaking hands with a business associate. "Do you, Adrian Cornelius Blackthorne, take this woman?" I stopped listening. Instead, I studied him from the corner of my eye, this man who now owned me in every way that mattered. His jaw was tight. A muscle jumped near his temple. His breathing was controlled, deliberate, like he was forcing himself to endure something unpleasant but necessary. He wasn't happy about this either. The realization should have brought some comfort. It didn't. It just made everything feel more hollow. "I do." His voice was deep, flat, empty of inflection. Then it was my turn. Do you, Elena Charlotte Whitford, take this man? The church went silent, every eye on me, every ear waiting. I opened my mouth. For one wild second, I imagined saying no. Imagined turning and running down that aisle, out into the rain, away from all of this. But where would I go? My father's debts were real. The threats from creditors were real. The choice had been made 3 months ago when Adrian's solicitor arrived at our townhouse with an offer, marriage in exchange for clearing every penny owed, plus a generous settlement for my parents' retirement. An offer we couldn't refuse. An offer that felt more like a sentence. I do. The words came out steady, clear, final. Adrian's hand tightened fractionally around mine, the only indication he'd heard me at all. The bishop smiled. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Adrian turned to face me for the first time since I'd entered the church. Our eyes met. His were cold, assessing, completely unreadable. He leaned in, and I braced myself, but the kiss was perfunctory. A brief press of lips against lips, over before it began. Duty fulfilled. Box checked. The crowd erupted into polite applause. I was a duchess now. I'd never felt more alone. The wedding breakfast was held at Blackthorne House, a massive Georgian mansion in Belgravia that made my family's crumbling townhouse look like a servant's cottage. Everything was excessive. Crystal chandeliers, gilded molding, enough food to feed half of London spread across tables that seemed to stretch into infinity. Adrian disappeared almost immediately. I watched him slip away from the receiving line after the first 20 minutes, citing business with his steward. No one questioned it. No one dared. He was the Duke of Blackthorne, 7th of his line, veteran of Her Majesty's campaigns in the Crimea, and reportedly one of the wealthiest men in England. If he wanted to abandon his own wedding breakfast, that was his prerogative. I was left to smile and nod and accept congratulations from people I barely knew, my face aching from the effort of appearing grateful. Such a lovely ceremony, Lady Pemberton gushed, gripping my hands with surprising strength for a woman in her 70s. And you'll do wonderfully as Duchess. The Duke needs a steady influence. Thank you, I murmured, because what else could I say? Of course, there's the matter of the estate's reputation. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. But I'm sure you've been briefed. The previous Duchess was quite fragile. I hadn't been briefed. No one had told me anything about Adrian's first wife except that she'd died 5 years ago. Childbirth, someone had mentioned vaguely. Tragic, they'd said, then changed the subject. I'm sure everything will be fine, I said, extracting my hands as politely as possible. Lady Pemberton looked doubtful, but moved on. The afternoon dragged. People ate. People drank. People danced. I stood by the window overlooking the garden, watching the rain continue its relentless assault on London, and wondered how long I could reasonably stay at my own wedding before escaping. Not enjoying yourself? I turned. A man I didn't recognize stood beside me. Mid-30s, handsome in a rakish way, with sandy hair and bright blue eyes that held too much amusement. I'm perfectly content, thank you, I lied. He laughed. Terrible liar. I'm Captain Thomas Crawford, friend of your husband's. Well, friend might be generous. We serve together. I occasionally remind him he's human, and he occasionally tolerates my existence. Despite myself, I felt my mouth twitch. That sounds exhausting for both of you. You have no idea. He gestured to the crowd. This must all be rather overwhelming. Adrian doesn't exactly ease people into his world, does he? Is there an easy way into this world? Fair point. Crawford studied me with open curiosity. Can I offer some unsolicited advice, Your Grace? The title still sounded foreign. Wrong. I suspect you're going to regardless. Adrian Blackthorne is the most stubborn, closed-off bastard I've ever met. And I've met a lot of bastards. Crawford's voice dropped, losing its playful edge. But he's not cruel, not deliberately. He's just broken in ways most people don't see. Don't take it personally when he shuts you out. It's not about you. That's supposed to be comforting? No, it's supposed to be honest. He raised his glass in a mock salute. Good luck, Duchess. You're going to need it. He walked away before I could respond. The sun was setting when Adrian finally reappeared, looking for all the world like a man preparing for an execution. He found me still by the window, still alone despite being surrounded by 200 guests. "It's time," he said. No preamble, no warmth. Time. Right. The wedding night. My stomach twisted, but I nodded and followed him through the house, up a sweeping marble staircase, down a long corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced Blackthorns, all of them looking vaguely disappointed. We stopped at a door near the end of the hall. Adrian opened it, stepped aside. "Your chambers." I walked into a suite that was easily 3 times the size of my childhood bedroom. Everything was decorated in shades of cream and gold, tasteful, expensive, impersonal. A massive 4-poster bed dominated one wall. My trunks had already been unpacked. My clothes hung in the wardrobe by invisible staff. "My rooms are through there," Adrian gestured to a connecting door. "It remains locked unless I have need of fulfilling marital obligations." The clinical phrasing made my skin crawl. "I see," I managed. "The staff will attend to your needs. Mrs. Henshaw is the housekeeper. She'll coordinate your schedule. You have an allowance for clothing and personal expenses. It's generous. Use it or don't. I don't care." He was still standing in the doorway, not quite inside, not quite outside, like he couldn't decide whether to flee or get this over with. "Is there anything else I should know?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Adrian's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might actually answer honestly. Then his expression went blank again. That terrible, impenetrable blankness that told me nothing. "Yes." He stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that felt louder than thunder. "I need to be clear about something, Elena. About what this is." I waited. "This marriage is a contract, a business arrangement. Your family needed money. I needed—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I needed to produce an heir. That's the extent of our obligation to one another. You will have my name, my protection, and access to resources you could never have dreamed of. In return, you will fulfill your duties as duchess and bear me a child. After that, we need never trouble each other again." Each word landed like a blow. "You will share my name, my title, and my wealth," Adrian continued, his voice dropping lower, harder. "But you will never have my heart. Do you understand?" Something hot and angry flared in my chest. I'd expected coldness. I'd prepared myself for indifference. But this deliberate cruelty, this preemptive rejection of anything resembling human connection, this I hadn't anticipated. "Perfectly clear," I said, meeting his eyes with what I hoped was equal coldness. "Is that all?" He looked almost surprised by my lack of reaction. "Good. Let him be surprised. For now." He turned to leave, then hesitated at the door. "I'll give you time to adjust. A few weeks. Then we'll address the matter of an heir." "How romantic." The sarcasm slipped out before I could stop it. Adrian's head turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't a romance, Elena. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us." Then he was gone, the connecting door closing behind him with a finality that felt like a prison cell locking. I stood alone in my beautiful, suffocating room and allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to feel the full weight of what I'd just agreed to. 5 minutes to let the tears come, hot and silent, running down my face and ruining the careful makeup someone had applied that morning. 5 minutes. Then I went to the wash basin, cleaned my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked older than 23. Her eyes were hard, determined. "You survived your father's gambling," I whispered to my reflection. "You survived 3 months of engagement to a stranger. You'll survive this too." I had no choice. The first week passed in a blur of awkward silence and careful avoidance. Adrian kept to his word. He stayed in his rooms, appeared only for dinner, which we ate in excruciating quiet, and then disappeared again into whatever business occupied his days. I was left to navigate Blackthorne House alone, learning its rhythms, meeting the staff, trying to find some sense of purpose in the enormous emptiness of my new life. Mrs. Henshaw, the housekeeper, was a severe woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But she was efficient, and she didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. His Grace keeps early hours, she informed me on my second morning. Breakfast at 6. He prefers to work undisturbed in his study until noon. Dinners at 8 sharp. He doesn't appreciate lateness. I see. And what am I supposed to do during all these hours when His Grace prefers to work undisturbed? Mrs. Henshaw's expression didn't change. That's entirely up to you, Your Grace. The previous Duchess spent most of her time in the conservatory. The previous Duchess. Adrian's first wife. The one no one talked about. What was she like? I asked before I could stop myself. Mrs. Henshaw's face closed like a door slamming shut. That's not my place to say, Your Grace. Will there be anything else? Apparently not. I explored the house instead. It was massive, 50 rooms at least, most of them unused, all of them filled with furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts waiting to be awakened. The conservatory Mrs. Henshaw had mentioned was on the east side, a glass-domed room filled with exotic plants that someone clearly tended with care. I found myself drawn there, to the green living things that seemed more welcoming than anything else in this mausoleum. It was there, on my 5th day as Duchess of Blackthorne, that I encountered my husband again. I was examining a peculiar orchid, trying to identify it from a botanical book I'd found on a shelf, when I heard footsteps behind me. That's Paphiopedilum rothschildianum, extremely rare. I turned. Adrian stood in the doorway, still in riding clothes, his dark hair windswept and damp with rain. He looked different, less composed, almost human. It's beautiful, I said carefully. My mother planted most of these, before she died. He stepped into the room but kept his distance, as if proximity might contaminate him. I keep them maintained. Seemed a waste to let them die, too. It was the most personal thing he'd said to me since our wedding night. That's thoughtful. Adrian made a dismissive sound. It's practical. The conservatory adds value to the estate. Of course, everything came back to duty, to obligation, to the careful maintenance of assets. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a long moment. Then Adrian cleared his throat. I'm hosting a dinner party next week. 20 guests. You'll need to act as hostess. I assumed I would. Can you manage it? Your mother mentioned you had limited experience with society functions. The casual condescension in his tone made my teeth clench. I can manage a dinner party, Adrian. I'm not completely incompetent. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance. I didn't say you were incompetent. You implied it. I was clarifying expectations. You were being insulting. His jaw tightened. If you're going to be sensitive about I'm not being sensitive. I'm being accurate. I closed the botanical book with more force than necessary. You've made it abundantly clear that you don't want me here, that this marriage is nothing but a transaction, that I'm essentially breeding stock with good manners. Fine. I've accepted that. But don't pretend you're being considerate when you're really just making sure your investment doesn't embarrass you in front of your peers. The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian stared at me like I'd just sprouted a second head. Apparently, no one spoke to the Duke of Blackthorne that way. You're right, he said finally, his voice clipped. That was insulting. I apologize. I blinked. An apology. I hadn't expected that. The dinner is next Friday, Adrian continued, back to business. Mrs. Henshaw will coordinate the details with you. Dress appropriately. And Elena? I waited. Thank you for agreeing to this. He gestured vaguely around the conservatory, but I knew he meant more than just the room. He meant the marriage, the arrangement, the whole miserable situation. Then he left before I could respond. I stood alone among the orchids, my heart pounding with a confusing mix of anger and something else I couldn't quite name. Because in that brief exchange, I'd glimpsed something beneath Adrian's carefully constructed armor. He wasn't just cold, he was afraid. Of what? I didn't know. But I intended to find out. The dinner party was supposed to be simple. It wasn't. I'd spent the entire week preparing, reviewing the guest list with Mrs. Henshaw, coordinating with the cook on the menu, ensuring every detail was perfect. 20 of London's most influential people would be sitting at our table, and I was determined not to give Adrian any reason to regret bringing me into his world, even if he'd made it clear I didn't actually belong there. The guests arrived promptly at 7. I stood beside Adrian in the entrance hall, watching as lords and ladies swept in from the rain, their expensive cloaks dripping on marble floors. Adrian greeted each one with the same cold courtesy he showed everyone, while I smiled until my face hurt and tried to remember names I'd only read on paper. "Lord and Lady Ashworth," Adrian said as an older couple approached. The man was silver-haired and distinguished, but there was something calculating in his eyes that made my skin crawl. "Your Grace, and the new Duchess." Lord Ashworth took my hand, his grip lingering a fraction too long. "Quite a fortunate match for the Whitfords, I hear." The insult was barely veiled. I felt Adrian stiffen beside me, but I kept my smile fixed. "Fortunate for both families, I believe," I said evenly. "Shall we move to the drawing room? Dinner will be served shortly." Lady Ashworth, a thin woman with a pinched face, looked me up and down like I was livestock at auction. "That's a lovely gown, dear. Is it new?" "Yes." "How nice." Her tone suggested it was anything but. The previous Duchess always wore such elegant things. She had exquisite taste. The previous Duchess, again, always hovering like a ghost I couldn't see but everyone else could. "I'm sure she did," I replied, refusing to take the bait. The evening proceeded with excruciating politeness. We sat at a table that could have seated 40, crystal and silver gleaming under candlelight. Adrian presided from the head, I from the foot, with an ocean of expensive china between us. The conversation flowed around topics I barely understood: politics, investments, scandals in families I'd never heard of. I mostly stayed quiet, observing. That had always been my strength: watching, listening, learning. My father had taught me that, back when he still cared about teaching me anything useful instead of just gambling away our future. "The Duke seems rather subdued tonight," Lady Pemberton commented to the woman beside her, loud enough for half the table to hear. "I do hope married life isn't dampening his spirits." Several people laughed. Adrian's expression didn't change, but I saw his knuckles go white around his wine glass. "I think His Grace is simply tired from managing his estates," I interjected smoothly. "It's demanding work, from what I understand." "Oh, does he discuss such things with you?" Lord Ashworth asked, eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "How progressive." More laughter. I felt heat creeping up my neck but kept my face neutral. "Actually," I started, but Captain Crawford cut in from across the table. "Speaking of estate management, Adrian, how are things up north? Still having trouble with those tenant disputes?" The conversation shifted mercifully away from me. But I caught Crawford's eye, and he gave me a subtle nod. A lifeline thrown. I appreciated it more than he could know. Dinner dragged on. Course after course appeared and disappeared while the guests drank too much wine and grew progressively louder. I was beginning to think we might actually survive the evening without incident when Lord Ashworth decided to detonate the bomb he'd apparently been carrying all night. "I must say, Blackthorne," he announced, setting down his glass with unnecessary force, "I'm surprised to see you entertaining so lavishly, given the recent unpleasantness." The table went silent. Adrian's face could have been carved from stone. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Ashworth." "Oh, come now. Surely you've seen the Times, the article about the inquiry?" I had no idea what article he meant. Clearly, neither did several other guests, judging by the confused looks being exchanged. "What inquiry?" Lady Pemberton asked, leaning forward with the eager interest of someone who smelled gossip. Ashworth smiled like a shark. "The military inquiry into the incident at Sevastopol. Apparently there are new witnesses coming forward, questions being asked about command decisions, deaths that might have been preventable." The color drained from Adrian's face. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely shaken. "That inquiry was closed 5 years ago," Adrian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Was it? I heard they're reopening it. Something about suppressed testimony. A sergeant who was paid to keep quiet, now willing to talk." Ashworth was enjoying this, the bastard. "Of course, I'm sure it's all just rumor, but you know how people talk." Adrian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This conversation is finished. Is it? Because from where I sit, it's only just beginning. The families of those men deserve answers, don't you think? 23 soldiers dead because someone gave the wrong order? Get out! Adrian's voice cut through the room like a whip. Several women gasped. Ashworth just smiled wider. Throwing me out won't change the truth, Blackthorne. You can hide behind your title and your money all you want, but those deaths are on your hands. Everyone knows it. I said get out. Adrian moved around the table so fast I barely saw him. Crawford jumped up, intercepting him before he could reach Ashworth. Easy, Crawford murmured, hands on Adrian's shoulders. He's not worth it. But Adrian wasn't listening. His face was white with rage. Or maybe pain, I couldn't tell which. His breathing was ragged, his whole body shaking with the effort of staying controlled. You don't know anything about Sevastopol, Adrian said, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted. You weren't there. You didn't see. He stopped himself, shook his head, then turned and walked out of the dining room without another word. The silence he left behind was suffocating. I sat frozen at the foot of the table, acutely aware that every eye was now on me. The new Duchess. The wife who clearly had no idea what her husband was capable of or what he'd done. Well, Lady Ashworth said primly, I suppose that's the end of dinner? People began standing, gathering wraps, making excuses. Within 10 minutes, the house was empty except for me, the staff, and somewhere upstairs Adrian, who'd disappeared into parts of the mansion I'd never been invited to explore. Crawford was the last to leave. He found me still sitting at the empty table, staring at the ruins of what was supposed to have been my first success as Duchess. That, he said quietly, was not your fault. Wasn't it? I'm his wife. I should have known. I should have been prepared for... I stopped, not even sure what I was trying to say. Crawford pulled out the chair beside me and sat. What do you know about Sevastopol? Nothing. He's never mentioned it. He wouldn't. Crawford was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. 5 years ago, Adrian was a major in the cavalry, young for the rank, but brilliant. They sent his unit to support an artillery position during the siege. Intelligence said the position was secure. It wasn't. The Russians had moved a battery during the night, something that should have been spotted by scouts but wasn't. My stomach was starting to sink. Adrian led his men in anyway. Orders were orders. They got caught in crossfire. 23 men died in less than 10 minutes. Adrian was one of 7 who made it back. That's not his fault, I said automatically. If the intelligence was wrong, there was an inquiry. They determined the scouts had been negligent. Several officers were disciplined. Adrian was cleared of any wrongdoing. Crawford met my eyes. But he never forgave himself. He resigned his commission a month later, came back to England, married Catherine, the previous Duchess, thinking maybe a normal life would, I don't know, fix something that was broken. What happened to her? She died in childbirth 3 years later. The baby, too. Crawford's voice was flat, matter of fact, but I could hear the pain underneath. Adrian was with her when it happened. He wasn't the same after that. I thought about the man who'd told me I would never have his heart, who'd made it clear this marriage was nothing but a transaction, who treated me like a necessary burden instead of a person. He's afraid, I said quietly, finally understanding. Terrified, Crawford agreed, of losing people, of failing them, of being responsible for more death. He stood, adjusting his coat. Ashworth's a vindictive bastard with a grudge because Adrian refused to invest in some scheme of his last year. This inquiry business is probably nonsense, but it doesn't matter. Adrian will tear himself apart over it anyway. Where is he? No idea, but if you're smart, you'll let him be. He's not fit company when he's like this. Crawford left. I sat alone in the empty dining room, listening to the rain hammer against the windows, and made a decision that was probably incredibly stupid. I went after Adrian. I found him in the library an hour later. Rather, I found evidence of him. A half-empty decanter of whiskey, a glass, and an open book face down on a leather chair. The room was dark except for a dying fire in the hearth, casting jumping shadows on rows and rows of books that probably hadn't been read in years. Adrian himself stood at the window, one hand braced against the frame, staring out at nothing. He'd shed his dinner jacket and loosened his collar, and there was something about the slump of his shoulders that made him look smaller somehow, less like a duke, more like a man who'd carried too much weight for too long. "You should leave," he said without turning around. I closed the door behind me. "No. I'm not in the mood for company, Elena." "I didn't ask what you were in the mood for." That got his attention. He turned and I saw his face properly for the first time, the redness around his eyes, the exhaustion etched into every line, the barely controlled chaos swimming just beneath the surface. "This doesn't concern you," he said. "Actually, it does. I'm your wife. Like it or not, what affects you affects me. And what happened tonight was none of your business." "Was humiliating," I finished, anger sparking in my chest. "For both of us. You walked out. You left me sitting there while your guests whispered and speculated and treated me like I was either complicit in whatever happened at Sevastopol or too stupid to understand it." Adrian flinched. "That wasn't my intention." "I don't care about your intention. I care about the reality. If you're going to make me play the role of duchess, then give me the information I need to actually do the job." He stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "You want to know about Sevastopol? I want to know what I'm walking into every time we go out in public. I want to know why Lord Ashworth hates you enough to detonate dinner parties. I stopped, frustrated. "I want you to stop treating me like a piece of furniture you're obligated to maintain." The silence stretched. Adrian picked up his whiskey glass, drained it, poured another. His hands weren't entirely steady. 23 men, he said finally. 23 men under my command. Dead because I trusted intelligence that turned out to be worthless and rode straight into an ambush. Crawford told me it wasn't your fault, that the inquiry cleared you. Crawford's a loyal friend, and the inquiry was a whitewash. Adrian's voice was bitter. They needed someone to blame who wasn't a major from a ducal family. So they blamed the scouts, disciplined a few lower-ranking officers, called it resolved. But you don't believe that. I know what I saw. I know I gave the order to advance. I know 23 families got letters because of decisions I made. He set down the glass hard enough that I thought it might shatter. And now Ashworth's right. Someone's reopening it, asking questions, which means it's all going to come out again. The newspapers will feast on it. Society will whisper. And you, he laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You'll get to be married to the Duke who got his men killed. I should have felt sympathetic. Part of me did. But a larger part was just angry. So your plan is what? Hide in here? Drink yourself unconscious? Feel sorry for yourself while Ashworth and people like him control the narrative? Adrian's head snapped up. Excuse me? You heard me. You're letting him win. You're acting exactly like a guilty man instead of someone who made a hard decision in an impossible situation. You don't understand. You're right. I don't. Because you won't explain it to me. You won't let anyone in. You just lock yourself away and bleed and expect the rest of us to tiptoe around your pain like it's something sacred instead of something that's eating you alive. He moved so fast I barely had time to react. Suddenly he was right in front of me, close enough that I could smell whiskey and rain and something else. Something raw and dangerous. You want to know what it was like? His voice was low, shaking. You want me to explain how it feels to watch men you trained, men who trusted you, get torn apart by artillery fire while you can't do anything except watch? How it sounds when they scream? How the ones who don't die right away beg you to help them, and you can't because there's nothing left to help? I held my ground even though my heart was pounding. Yes, I want to know, because that's the man I married, whether either of us likes it or not, and I'm tired of being kept in the dark. Adrian stared at me. For a long moment I thought he might actually hit something, maybe the wall, maybe the furniture. Instead, he turned away, running both hands through his hair in a gesture of complete frustration. You're relentless, he muttered. I'm a survivor. There's a difference. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. I couldn't tell. I dream about them, he said quietly. Every night, different variations of the same nightmare. Sometimes I save them. Most times I don't. I wake up and for a few seconds I think I'm still there. Still hearing the artillery, still smelling blood and smoke and death. I didn't say anything. What could I say? Catherine, my first wife, she tried to help. She was gentle and kind and patient. But I couldn't. He trailed off. I couldn't let her in either. And when she died, when I lost her and the baby both, all I could think was that it was punishment for Sevastopol, for failing those men, for being the kind of person who gets people killed just by existing. That's not how the world works, I said softly. Isn't it? Adrian turned back to me, and the look in his eyes was so bleak it hurt. Everyone I've ever cared about either dies or should have never trusted me in the first place. You want to know why I told you that you'd never have my heart? Because I'm trying to protect you. From me. The confession hung in the air between us. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The fire popped and hissed. I took a step closer, then another, until I was standing right in front of him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his skin. I don't need your protection, I said. I need your honesty. I need you to stop pushing me away like I'm some fragile thing that'll break the moment life gets difficult. I've survived worse than you, Adrian Blackthorne, and I'm still here. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me. Not the convenient wife, not the transaction, but the actual person standing in front of him. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. Good. Expectations are boring. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Then his expression grew serious again. If you stay, if you insist on being part of this, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Ashworth's not going to let this go. The inquiry will drag my name through the mud. People will talk. You'll be caught in the crossfire. Then we'll deal with it together. You say that now? I say that because I mean it. I reached out and did something reckless. I took his hand. His fingers were cold, tense. I didn't ask for this marriage any more than you did. But we're in it now. And I'd rather fight beside you than stand around being useless while you destroy yourself. Adrian stared at our joined hands like he couldn't quite comprehend what was happening. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, his fingers tightened around mine. You're going to regret this, he warned. Probably. But that's my choice to make, not yours. We stood there in the dying firelight, holding hands like children afraid of the dark, and I felt something shift, some invisible wall between us developing its first crack. It wasn't love. It wasn't even really trust yet, but it was a beginning. The article appeared in the Times 3 days later. I was having breakfast, alone as usual, when Mrs. Henshaw brought me the paper, her face more pinched than normal. She didn't say anything, just laid it beside my plate and retreated quickly. The headline was damning. Sevastopol Massacre. New evidence suggests Duke of Blackthorne ignored warnings, 23 dead. I read the article twice, my coffee going cold. It was vicious, detailed, full of anonymous quotes from military sources and soldiers who were there, describing Adrian as reckless, arrogant, too young for command, more concerned with glory than the lives of his men. There were names listed. All 23 men who'd died, their ages, where they were from, families they'd left behind. At the bottom, a single line that made my blood run cold. A formal military tribunal is being convened to investigate. The Duke has been ordered to appear. I found Adrian in his study, already surrounded by papers. He looked like he hadn't slept, probably because he hadn't. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair stood in different directions like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. You've seen it, he said. Not a question. The whole city's probably seen it by now. My solicitor thinks I should refuse to appear, make them force the issue. But that just makes me look guilty. Adrian threw down the paper he'd been reading. There's no good option here, Elena. Either I go and get torn apart by a tribunal looking for a scapegoat, or I refuse and look like I'm hiding something. What about the truth? I asked. He laughed bitterly. The truth doesn't matter. It never does. This is about blame, about finding someone to punish 5 years too late. I sat in the chair across from his desk. Crawford said there was a sergeant, someone who was paid to keep quiet. Who is he? Sergeant Robert Thorne. He was one of the scouts who missed the Russian battery movement. After the inquiry, he resigned his commission and disappeared. I assumed he'd taken his payout and vanished. Adrian's jaw tightened. Apparently he's resurfaced, and he's talking. What's he saying? That I knew the intelligence was questionable. That I pushed forward anyway because I wanted to make a name for myself. That I sacrificed my men for personal glory. Each word came out like Adrian was chewing glass. None of it's true. But it doesn't matter. Once the story's out there, once people believe it, then we make them believe something else, I interrupted. Adrian looked at me like I'd lost my mind. How exactly do you propose we do that? By finding Thorne, by talking to him directly, by figuring out who's paying him to lie. Because someone is, Adrian. This isn't just about reopening an old inquiry. Someone wants to destroy you. And I want to know who. Elena, this isn't, you can't just... He stopped, clearly struggling with how to respond. This is dangerous. Whoever's behind this has resources and reach. They've managed to manipulate military proceedings and the press. You can't simply walk up to their pawn and demand answers. Watch me. No. Adrian stood, came around the desk. Absolutely not. I won't have you putting yourself at risk because of my mistakes. I stood too, meeting his eyes directly. Again, with the protecting me. When are you going to understand that I don't need or want your protection? I need your partnership. And right now your partnership means letting me help instead of treating me like I'm made of porcelain. We stared at each other. I could see him warring with himself, wanting to push me away, wanting to keep me safe, wanting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was serious about standing beside him. You have no idea what you're getting into, he said finally. Then explain it to me. Stop hiding. Stop pushing. Treat me like an adult who can make her own decisions about what risks she's willing to take. Outside, rain began to fall again. It felt like London had been drowning for weeks now, the sky perpetually gray, the streets perpetually wet. A perfect backdrop for everything falling apart. Adrian moved closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. There was something in his expression I'd never seen before. Vulnerability, maybe, or desperation. If I let you do this, he said quietly, if I let you wade into this mess with me, I need you to understand something. These people, whoever's orchestrating this, they won't play fair. They'll use you, hurt you, turn you into leverage against me. Let them try. Elena, Adrian. I put my hand on his chest, felt his heart racing beneath my palm. I'm not Catherine. I'm not fragile. I'm not going to break the moment things get hard. Stop comparing me to a ghost and start seeing me for who I actually am. Something in his face cracked. For just a moment, the walls came down, and I saw the real man underneath, terrified, exhausted, drowning in guilt and grief and the impossible weight of expectations he'd never asked for. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Do what? Trust someone. Let someone in. I've spent 5 years making sure I never have to... He stopped, shook his head. I don't know how to be what you need. I don't need you to be anything except honest. Can you do that? He was quiet for a long time. Then slowly he nodded. Thorne was last seen in Whitechapel, renting a room above a tavern called the Crimson Bell. Crawford's been making inquiries, discreetly, since the article came out. Then that's where we start. We? Yes, we. You and me, together. That's what marriage is supposed to mean, isn't it? Adrian's hand came up to cover mine where it still rested on his chest. His fingers were warm, solid, real. This is a terrible idea, he said. Probably. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. Thank you. This time he actually smiled, small, brief, but genuine. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen Whitechapel. We went that night. Adrian wanted to wait, to plan, to bring security. I convinced him that showing up with a small army would just spook Thorne into running again. Better to go quietly, just the two of us, and try to get answers before whoever was pulling the strings realized what we were doing. Crawford insisted on coming anyway. Someone needs to make sure you two idiots don't get yourselves killed, he said cheerfully, checking the pistol tucked into his coat. The Crimson Bell was exactly as awful as I'd imagined. A sagging building in a narrow street that smelled like sewage and desperation, the kind of place respectable people didn't acknowledge existed. We arrived just after dark, the rain turning the cobblestones into a slick, treacherous maze. "Last chance to turn back," Adrian said as we stood outside, looking at the peeling paint and broken windows. "Not a chance." He sighed, but didn't argue. We went inside. The tavern was crowded, loud, thick with smoke and the sour smell of cheap gin. Conversations died as we entered. 3 people who clearly didn't belong here, especially me in my dark cloak and expensive boots. Eyes tracked us as we moved through the crowd. Not friendly, not welcoming. Crawford went to the bar, spoke quietly to the keeper. Money changed hands. The keeper jerked his head toward a staircase in the back. "Second floor," Crawford reported. "Third door on the right. And he's not alone." Adrian's hand went to the knife I knew he carried. "How many?" Keeper didn't say, just warned me not to start any trouble he'd have to clean up. We climbed the stairs. The wood creaked under our weight, announcing our presence to anyone listening. At the top, a narrow hallway stretched into darkness, lit only by a single guttering candle. Third door on the right. Adrian knocked. "Sergeant Thorne? I need to speak with you." Silence. Then footsteps. The door cracked open and a man's face appeared, 40s, weathered, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much and trusted nothing. "Go away," Thorne said. "I can't do that. We need to talk about Sevastopol." "Got nothing to say to you, Your Grace." The title was mocking. "Said everything I needed to say to the papers." "That's not true and you know it." Adrian's voice was hard. "Someone paid you to lie. I want to know who." Thorne's eyes flicked to Patami, then to Crawford, calculating odds. "Don't know what you're talking about." "The inquiry cleared you along with the rest of the scouts," Adrian pressed. "You had no reason to come forward now unless someone made it worth your while. How much did they offer you?" The door started to close. I stepped forward, blocking it with my boot. "Wait," I said. "Please, just 5 minutes. That's all we're asking." Thorne looked at me more carefully. "You're the new Duchess." "Yes." You got any idea what your husband did? What kind of man he is?" "I know he's desperate for answers, and I know whatever you told the newspapers isn't the whole truth. Help us understand what really happened." Something shifted in Thorne's expression. Not quite guilt, but close. He glanced behind him into the darkened room, then back at us. 5 minutes, he said finally. "Then you leave. And if anyone asks, we never talked." He let us in. The room was small, sparse, a bed, a table, a single chair, and sitting in that chair, calm as death, was Lord Ashworth. "Well," Ashworth said, smiling that shark smile, "isn't this convenient?" Adrian moved so fast I barely registered it. He had Ashworth by the throat, slamming him against the wall before Crawford could intervene. "You!" Adrian snarled. "You orchestrated all of this." "Did I?" Ashworth didn't even struggle, just kept smiling. "Or did I simply provide Sergeant Thorne here with the encouragement to finally tell the truth about what happened at Sevastopol? About how you ignored clear warnings? About how your arrogance killed 23 men? It's a lie." "Is it?" Ashworth's eyes glittered. "Tell me, Your Grace. If you're so certain of your innocence, why haven't you denied the accusations publicly? Why hide? Why run?" Adrian's hand tightened. I saw murder in his eyes. Crawford grabbed his arm. "Not worth it," Crawford said urgently. "Adrian, he's not worth it." But Adrian wasn't listening. 5 years of guilt and grief and self-hatred were pouring out, and Ashworth was the perfect target for all of it. "You want to know why?" Adrian's voice shook. "Because every word of that article is designed to make me look guilty regardless of what I say. Because the truth is complicated and messy and doesn't fit into neat newspaper columns. Because I've spent 5 years trying to live with what happened, and you're trying to turn it into entertainment for people who weren't there and will never understand." "How moving," Ashworth said. "But it doesn't change the facts. You gave the order. Men died. And now, finally, you're going to be held accountable." I stepped forward. "Why?" Ashworth looked at me. "Excuse me? Why go through all this trouble? What did Adrian do to you that warrants destroying his life?" He refused to invest in a perfectly legitimate no. I cut him off. This isn't about money. It's too personal, too vindictive. So I'll ask again, why? For the first time, Ashworth's composure flickered. His eyes went cold, hard as stones. Because men like him, Ashworth said quietly, who inherit wealth and title and power they didn't earn, who make mistakes that cost lives and walk away without consequences. They deserve to burn. My son was at Sevastopol, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Lieutenant James Ashworth, 24 years old. He died in that ambush because your husband gave the order to advance. So yes, Duchess, this is personal, and I won't stop until everyone knows exactly what kind of man Adrian Blackthorne really is. The room went silent except for the rain hammering against the window. Adrian's hand fell away from Ashworth's throat. He stepped back, face white as chalk. James Ashworth, he said hoarsely. I remember him. He was brave. One of the last to fall. He tried to rally the men when everything went to hell. And then he died. Because of you. Yes. Adrian's voice broke. Yes, he died because of me. They all did. And I've carried that every single day since. But lying about what happened, twisting the truth to make me into something I'm not, that doesn't honor their memory. It just turns their deaths into a weapon. Ashworth stood, straightening his coat. You can dress it up however you want, Your Grace. The tribunal will decide the truth. And when they do, when your name is ruined and your reputation destroyed, maybe then you'll understand what it feels like to lose everything. He walked to the door. Thorne followed like a loyal dog. Wait, I said. Both men stopped. I looked at Thorne. You were there. You saw what happened. Is Adrian lying? Did he ignore warnings? Thorne wouldn't meet my eyes. I don't. The truth, Sergeant. Not what Lord Ashworth paid you to say. What actually happened? Don't answer that, Ashworth snapped. But Thorne was already shaking his head. The intelligence was bad. We all knew it might be bad. But the orders came from higher up. Command wanted that artillery position taken regardless of risk. Major Blackthorne, he swallowed hard. He objected, said we needed more reconnaissance. They overruled him, told him to proceed or face court-martial for insubordination. Adrian stared. What? You didn't know? Thorne looked at him directly for the first time. They buried it, made sure that part never came out in the inquiry, made it look like the call was yours when really you were following orders you knew were wrong. You're lying, Ashworth said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. I'm done lying. Thorne's shoulders sagged. I'm sorry, sir, I needed the money, but I can't do this anymore. Not even for him. He walked out, leaving Ashworth standing alone in the dingy room. This doesn't change anything, Ashworth said, but he didn't sound convincing anymore. The tribunal will hear the truth, I interrupted. The whole truth, including the part about you bribing witnesses and manipulating evidence. And when it comes out, and it will come out, you won't just look vindictive. You'll look criminal. Ashworth's face twisted with rage. You think you can threaten me? I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining reality. You wanted justice for your son. I understand that. But this, I gestured around the room. This isn't justice. It's revenge. And it's not going to bring James back. For a moment, I thought Ashworth might actually hit me. Instead, he straightened his shoulders, adjusted his cuffs, and walked out without another word. The three of us stood in the empty room, rain drumming overhead, processing what had just happened. Did that really just work? Crawford asked, sounding genuinely shocked. I have no idea, I admitted. Adrian was still staring at the spot where Thorne had stood, his face a mix of confusion and something that might have been hope. They overruled me, he said quietly. All this time, I thought it was my decision, my failure. It was their decision, I corrected gently. You were following orders. That doesn't erase the guilt, I know that, but it changes the story. He turned to me, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. Raw gratitude mixed with disbelief, like he couldn't quite process that someone had just fought for him instead of against him. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did. Why? I stepped closer, reached up and touched his face, the first truly intimate gesture I'd ever made toward him. Because you're my husband, I said simply, and because you deserve someone in your corner, even if you don't believe it yet. Adrian's hand came up to cover mine, and right there, in a filthy room above a Whitechapel tavern, something fundamental changed between us. The walls didn't come down completely, but they cracked wide enough to let light through. The walls didn't come down completely, but they cracked wide enough to let light through. We left the Crimson Bell in silence, Crawford leading the way through Whitechapel's maze of narrow streets. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the air still felt heavy, oppressive, like the city itself was holding its breath. Adrian walked beside me, close enough that our shoulders occasionally brushed, and he didn't pull away. That small contact felt monumental. "We need to find the orders," Adrian said as we reached Crawford's carriage. "The original command directives. If what Thorne said is true, there's documentation somewhere proving I was overruled." "Military archives," Crawford suggested, climbing into the driver's seat. "But accessing them without authorization—" "I know people," Adrian interrupted. "Colonel Hammond at the War Office. He served with my father. He might be willing to help." I watched him transform before my eyes, from the broken man in the library to something sharper, more focused. He was thinking strategically now, planning instead of drowning. It was the first time I'd seen him actually fight back instead of just enduring. "What about Ashworth?" I asked. "What about him?" "He's not going to just disappear because we called his bluff. If anything, this makes him more dangerous." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Let him come. I'm done hiding." Crawford glanced back at us, eyebrows raised. "That's a different tune than this morning. This morning I thought I was guilty." Adrian looked at me, something unreadable in his eyes. "Turns out I might not be. Changes things." The carriage jolted forward. We rode through the dark streets, past shuttered shops and gas lamps casting weak pools of yellow light, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. Adrian had never actually believed in his own innocence. He'd carried the guilt for so long it had become part of his identity. Challenging that meant challenging everything he'd built his life around. No wonder he'd been so determined to keep me at a distance. Getting close to someone meant they might actually see him, might actually question the story he'd told himself for 5 years. "Where are we going?" I asked as the carriage turned away from Belgravia. "My estate," Adrian said. "Blackthorne Hall, north of here, about 3 hours by rail. I need access to my father's papers. He kept meticulous records of his military service. If there's any documentation about command structure in Crimea, it'll be there." "When do we leave?" "First light. Crawford can make the arrangements. I'm coming with you." Adrian turned to stare at me. "Elena, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is. You think I went through all that tonight just to sit in London while you disappear into the countryside?" I met his gaze steadily. "We're doing this together, remember? Blackthorne Hall isn't London. It's remote, harsh. The weather's turning. We could be snowed in for weeks once winter really hits. And the staff there, they remember Catherine. They're not going to welcome. I don't care if they welcome me or not. I'm coming." Crawford laughed quietly from the driver's seat. "Give it up, Adrian. She's more stubborn than you are." Adrian looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he just shook his head. "Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." We arrived at Blackthorne Hall 3 days later, after a train journey north through increasingly bleak countryside. The estate sat on the edge of the Yorkshire moors, a massive stone fortress that looked like it had been carved from the landscape itself, all gray towers and narrow windows designed to withstand sieges that hadn't happened in centuries. The staff lined up to greet us in the courtyard. 20 people, maybe more, all watching me with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. An older woman stepped forward, Mrs. Palmer, the housekeeper, with iron gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. "Your Grace," she said to Adrian, her voice formal. Then, reluctantly to me, "Your Grace." "Mrs. Palmer." Adrian's tone was clipped, businesslike. "We'll be staying indefinitely. The Duchess will need chambers prepared, and I'll need access to my father's study. No one is to disturb me there." "Of course, Your Grace. Shall we prepare the Duchess's usual rooms?" The silence that followed was suffocating. The previous duchess's rooms are closed, Adrian said finally. Prepare the East Wing suite for my wife. Mrs. Palmer's mouth tightened, but she nodded. As you wish. The staff dispersed. Adrian turned to me, and I saw the tension in every line of his body. I should have prepared them, he said quietly. Should have sent word you were coming. It's fine. It's not. They're going to compare you to Catherine constantly, judge every decision you make against hers. It's going to be… Adrian. I touched his arm. I can handle it. He looked doubtful but didn't argue. We went inside. Blackthorne Hall was even more imposing on the interior, all stone and dark wood with tapestries that looked older than England itself. The air smelled like dust and history, and our footsteps echoed in empty corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The study's this way, Adrian said, leading me through a maze of hallways. I'll start going through my father's papers tonight. If you need anything, I'll find you. He stopped outside a heavy oak door. Elena, about what happened in London, what you did, confronting Ashworth, getting Thorne to tell the truth. I never thanked you properly. You don't have to thank me. I do. Because no one's ever… He struggled with the words. No one's ever fought for me like that. Not since my mother died. Maybe not even then. The rawness in his voice made my chest tight. I wanted to reach for him, to close the distance between us, but something held me back. We weren't there yet. Might never be there. You're my husband, I said instead. That means something to me, even if it doesn't to you yet. Adrian flinched. It means something. I'm just not very good at showing it. Then practice. He almost smiled. Then the door to the study opened from the inside, and we both jumped. A man stood there, late 50s, thin, with wire-rimmed spectacles and the ink-stained fingers of someone who spent his life with books. He looked startled to see us. Your Grace! I wasn't expecting… Mrs. Palmer didn't mention Mr. Graves. Adrian's voice cooled. What are you doing in my father's study? I'm the estate librarian, Your Grace. I maintain the archives. I come here weekly to ensure the documents are properly preserved. Graves looked between us nervously. I can return later if you need privacy. No, stay. I need your help, actually. Adrian stepped into the study, and I followed. I'm looking for military correspondence from 1854 to 1856. Anything related to the Crimean campaign, particularly command structure and orders issued to cavalry units. Graves's face went carefully blank. That's quite a broad search, Your Grace. Can you narrow it down or not? I suppose I could. Though some of those documents may be classified, they're my father's personal papers, in my house. Nothing is classified from me. Of course not, Your Grace. I just meant… Graves swallowed hard. May I ask what you're looking for specifically? Proof that I was following orders at Sevastopol, that the decision to advance wasn't mine alone. The librarian went pale. Your Grace, perhaps this isn't the best time to revisit… Mr. Graves. Adrian's voice dropped to something dangerous. Are you refusing to help me? No, of course not. There are people who might not want certain information brought to light. People with considerable influence who have an interest in maintaining the official narrative. I stepped forward. Who? Graves looked at me like he'd just noticed I existed. Forgive me, Your Grace, but I don't know if I should… Someone's been threatening you, I said, reading his fear clearly. Haven't they? Someone told you not to help if the Duke came asking questions. The librarian's silence was answer enough. Adrian moved so fast, Graves stumbled backward. Who? I don't know his name. A man came here 2 weeks ago, said he represented certain military interests. He said if anyone started asking about Sevastopol, I was to discourage the inquiry, said there would be consequences if I didn't cooperate. What kind of consequences? He didn't specify. But he knew things, Your Grace, about my family, my daughter's school, the amount of debt my sons accrued. Graves was shaking now. I have no desire to work against you, but I can't put my family at risk. Adrian's hands clenched into fists. I could see him warring with himself, anger at the betrayal, understanding of the position Graves was in. What did you tell him? I asked quietly. Nothing. I swear, Your Grace, I simply… I may have mentioned that certain documents from that period had been damaged in a roof leak last winter, made them difficult to access. Were they actually damaged? Graves hesitated. Some were, but not the military correspondence. That's kept in the vault, climate-controlled, completely intact. Show us, Adrian commanded. Your Grace, if he finds out, I don't care who finds out. Show us the vault, now. Graves led us deeper into the study, to a wall lined with bookshelves. He pressed something hidden, and an entire section swung inward, revealing a small room beyond. Inside, wooden filing cabinets lined the walls, each drawer labeled with dates and categories. 1854 to 1856, Graves said, pointing to the far wall. Everything related to the Crimean campaign. Your father was meticulous. He kept copies of every order he received or issued. Adrian was already moving toward the cabinets, pulling open drawers, scanning documents with an intensity that made him look almost feverish. Elena, he said without looking up, help me. We're looking for anything from high command to field officers, particularly orders issued in October 1854. We spent hours going through papers. My eyes burned from reading faded handwriting by lamplight. My back ached from hunching over documents, but I didn't stop. Somewhere in this mass of military bureaucracy was the truth that could save Adrian's reputation or confirm his worst fears. It was nearly midnight when I found it. Adrian. He looked up from the letter he'd been reading. I held out a single sheet of paper, my hand shaking slightly. Read this. He took it. I watched his eyes scan the page, saw the exact moment he understood what he was holding. His face went white. This is... He swallowed hard. This is the order. The document was dated October 23rd, 1854. Direct from General Cardigan to Major Adrian Blackthorne. Orders to advance on the Russian artillery position, regardless of intelligence quality. Failure to comply would result in court-martial for cowardice in the face of the enemy. You were right, I said softly. You were following orders. They made me responsible for a decision I never made. Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper. They let me carry the guilt for 23 deaths when they knew. They knew it was their call, not mine. Why would they do that? Because I was expendable and they weren't. Because blaming a young major was easier than admitting the generals got it wrong. His hands were shaking now, the paper rustling. Because the army protects itself first and its soldiers never. Graves cleared his throat from the doorway. Your Grace, there's more. More? Your father kept a journal during the campaign. Personal observations, not official records. It's in his private desk. I think you should read it. Adrian found the journal in a locked drawer, leather-bound, worn from handling. He opened it to the middle where his father had bookmarked a page with a faded ribbon. His face went from white to gray as he read. What is it? I asked. Adrian handed me the journal without speaking. I read the entry dated November 15th, 1854. Received word today of the disaster at Sevastopol. 23 men dead, including young Ashworth, a fine officer, lost to the incompetence of high command. My son survived, thank God. But the guilt in his letters is unbearable. He blames himself. They're letting him blame himself. Cardigan should hang for what he's done, but he won't. Men like him never do. Instead, they'll sacrifice whoever's convenient. I've written to Hammond at the War Office, demanding the truth come out. He says it's impossible. Political concerns, public morale, the usual rot. They're going to bury this, and Adrian will carry it forever unless I can... The entry stopped mid-sentence. I flipped to the next page, but it was blank. The one after that, too. He died 2 weeks later, Adrian said hoarsely. Heart attack. I thought he was disappointed in me, that he died ashamed of what I'd done. Adrian, he was trying to clear my name. All this time he was fighting for me, and I never knew. The grief in his voice was devastating. I wanted to comfort him, but what could I say? That 5 years of unnecessary guilt could be erased with a few pages of old paper? That the truth mattering would bring back the men who died or the father who tried to save his son's reputation? What do we do with this? I asked, finally. Adrian looked at the order, at his father's journal. at the mountain of evidence proving he'd been nothing but a scapegoat. We take it to the tribunal. We make them see the truth. They won't want to see it. Graves said it himself. There are people with influence who want this buried. Then we make it impossible to bury. Adrian's voice was hardening, the grief transforming into something sharper. We go public. Give the evidence to the press. Force the tribunal to acknowledge it. That's dangerous. If we accuse high command of a cover-up, what are they going to do? I'm already facing public humiliation and possible criminal charges. What's left to threaten me with? He had a point. But something about this felt wrong, too easy, like we were missing a piece of the puzzle. We should talk to Crawford first, I said. Get his advice before we... A crash from somewhere in the house cut me off. Then shouting, then the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Adrian was moving before I could react, out of the vault and through the study. I followed, heart pounding. We found Mrs. Palmer in the main hall, backed against the wall by three men I'd never seen before. Rough-looking, dressed in dark clothes, clearly not staff or guests. "Where's the Duke?" one of them demanded, gripping Mrs. Palmer's arm hard enough to leave marks. "Get your hands off her," Adrian commanded. The men turned. The one holding Mrs. Palmer smiled, ugly, missing teeth. "Your Grace, how convenient. We were just about to search the house for you." "Who sent you?" "Does it matter? You've been making inquiries, asking questions. People don't appreciate it." Adrian stepped forward, putting himself between the men and Mrs. Palmer. "Get out of my house." "Can't do that. We've got orders. You're to stop digging into Sevastopol. Destroy whatever evidence you've found. And if you don't..." The man pulled out a knife, let the blade catch the lamplight. "Well, accidents happen, especially in big old houses like this. Fires start. People get hurt." Ice ran down my spine. This wasn't just threats anymore. This was real, immediate danger. "You're going to threaten me in my own home?" Adrian's voice was deadly quiet. "We're going to do whatever it takes to make you understand. This inquiry dies tonight, one way or another." Adrian moved like lightning. He grabbed the nearest candlestick, solid brass, heavy enough to brain someone, and swung. The first man went down hard. The other two rushed him. I didn't think. I just reacted. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace and swung it at the nearest attacker. It connected with his shoulder, and he howled, spinning toward me. "The Duchess wants to play?" He lunged. Adrian intercepted him, slamming him into the wall. "You don't touch her." The third man pulled a pistol. Everything slowed down. I saw him raise it, saw the barrel pointing at Adrian's back, saw my husband completely exposed while he fought the other attacker. I threw the poker. It wasn't a good throw. It wasn't even an accurate throw. But it hit the man's arm just as he pulled the trigger, and the shot went wide, shattering a window instead of Adrian's skull. The noise was deafening in the enclosed space. Adrian used the distraction. He wrenched the attacker's arm behind his back hard enough that I heard something crack, then kicked his legs out from under him. The man went down screaming. The one with the gun was recovering, bringing the weapon back around. I was too far away to do anything. Adrian was still grappling with the other attacker. Mrs. Palmer hit the gunman over the head with a bronze statue of some long-dead Blackthorne. He collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. The silence that followed was broken only by harsh breathing and the moaning of injured men. "Is everyone all right?" Adrian asked, his voice remarkably steady for someone who'd just nearly been shot. "I think so," I managed, though my hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. "Mrs. Palmer nodded, still clutching the statue like she might need to use it again. "Good." Adrian looked at the three men on the floor, one unconscious, one holding his broken arm, one still dazed from the candlestick. "Now, let's discuss who sent you and what exactly you were supposed to accomplish here." The man with the broken arm spat blood. "You're dead. You just don't know it yet." "Is that so? You think this is the end? This is just the beginning. You've got no idea how deep this goes, how many people want you buried." "Then let them come." Adrian's voice was pure steel. "Let them all come, because I'm done running, I'm done hiding, and I'm done letting corrupt bastards control my life." "You're a fool." "Maybe, but I'm a fool with evidence, with proof of what really happened. And tomorrow morning, that proof goes to every newspaper in London. Let's see how your employers feel about that." The man actually laughed, though it sounded more like choking. "You do that, And the next visitors won't be as polite as us. They'll burn this place to the ground with everyone in it. I stepped forward before Adrian could respond. No, they won't. Because if anything happens to this house, if any of us are harmed, the evidence gets released anyway. We've already made arrangements, so your employers have a choice. Let the truth come out now, on our terms, or let it come out later with the added scandal of attempted murder and arson. It was a complete bluff. We hadn't made any arrangements, but the man didn't know that. You're lying. Am I? Test it and find out. He looked uncertain now. Good. Adrian, I said quietly, we need to send for the authorities, have these men arrested. Already done, Mrs. Palmer said. I sent one of the footmen to the village the moment I saw them breaking in. Constable should be here within the hour. Adrian looked at his housekeeper with new respect. Thank you, Mrs. Palmer. She nodded stiffly. No one threatens Blackthorne Hall, not while I'm still breathing. The constable arrived 40 minutes later with 3 deputies. The attackers were hauled away, still making threats that sounded increasingly empty. We gave statements showing the broken window and damaged furniture as evidence. This is serious business, Your Grace, the constable said as he prepared to leave. These men aren't common thieves. Someone with resources sent them. You should consider additional security. I will, Adrian assured him. Thank you, Constable. We watched them leave, the wagon carrying our attackers disappearing into the dark. Then Adrian turned to me. You threw a poker at an armed man. Yes. You could have been killed. So could you. That's why I threw the poker. He stared at me like I was some kind of puzzle he couldn't solve. You're insane. Probably. Goes well with your stubbornness. Adrian's mouth twitched. Then, completely unexpectedly, he laughed. A real laugh, not bitter or sarcastic, just genuine amusement at the absolute absurdity of our situation. We nearly died, he said. I know. And you're making jokes. What else am I supposed to do? Cry? Scream? Neither of those helps. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the adrenaline still coursing through him, the fear he'd been suppressing while dealing with the immediate threat. I thought he was going to shoot you, Adrian said quietly. When that man went for you, I thought, but he didn't. I'm fine. This time. But they'll try again, Elena. They're not going to just give up because we fought back once. I know. Then why are you still here? Why aren't you demanding I send you back to London, somewhere safe? I looked at him, really looked at him, at this complicated, damaged man who'd spent 5 years punishing himself for crimes he didn't commit, who'd built walls so high he couldn't see over them anymore, who was finally starting to fight back against the darkness. Because I meant what I said in London. We're doing this together. Even if it gets us both killed? Even then, Adrian shook his head slowly. You're the most stubborn, reckless, brave woman I've ever met. Is that a compliment? I honestly don't know. We stood there in the damaged hall, surrounded by broken glass and overturned furniture, and for the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were actually on the same side. Not just tolerating each other, actually together. What now? I asked. Adrian's expression hardened. Now we go on the offensive. Tomorrow morning, we take that evidence to London. We find the newspapers who will print the truth, and we make it impossible for anyone to threaten us without exposing themselves. That's incredibly dangerous. Yes, we could lose everything. We could, but you're going to do it anyway. Yes. He met my eyes. Will you come with me? I should have said no. Should have recognized how far out of our depth we were. Should have understood that powerful people who were willing to send armed men into our home wouldn't hesitate to do worse. Instead, I said, try and stop me. We left for London at dawn, taking the evidence with us. The journey felt longer this time, every mile weighted with anticipation and dread. Adrian spent most of it going through the documents again, as if the words might change if he read them enough times. What if it's not enough? He asked as the train rattled south. Then we find more. What if there is no more? What if this is all we have, and it's not enough to convince anyone? I took his hand, surprised when he didn't pull away. Then at least we tried. At least you fought back instead of just accepting their version of events. He squeezed my fingers. When did you get so brave? I've always been brave. You just didn't notice. I notice now. The train pulled into King's Cross Station just after noon. Crawford was waiting for us on the platform, looking uncharacteristically serious. We have a problem, he said without preamble. What kind of problem? The tribunal's been moved up. They're convening tomorrow morning instead of next week. Someone's pushing for a fast resolution. Adrian's face went hard. They're trying to railroad this before we can present our evidence. That's my guess, but there's more. Crawford handed Adrian a newspaper. This came out this morning. I read over Adrian's shoulder. The headline made my blood run cold. Duchess of Blackthorne. Under investigation, questions raised about family's criminal connections. The article was pure poison. It claimed my father hadn't just gambled away our fortune. He'd been involved in smuggling, fraud, possibly worse. That Adrian had married me knowing about these connections. That the whole marriage was a scheme to hide illegal money. Every word was a lie. They're going after you now, Crawford said, looking at me with sympathy, trying to discredit Adrian by association. Let them, I said, though my voice shook. It doesn't change what we know about Sevastopol. No, but it changes public perception. If people think you're both corrupt, they won't care about the evidence. Adrian crumpled the newspaper. Who wrote this? Anonymous source. But I'd bet money Ashworth's behind it. Then we destroy him, publicly. Tomorrow at the tribunal. Adrian's voice was pure fury. We present the evidence, we call Thorne to testify, and we make sure everyone understands exactly how far these people went to protect their lives. Adrian, think about this, Crawford urged. If you go into that tribunal swinging, if you accuse High Command of conspiracy and cover-up without absolute proof, I have proof. You have documents that could be interpreted different ways. You have a journal from a dead man. You have the word of a paid witness who might recant the moment he's under oath. Crawford gripped Adrian's shoulder. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying you need to be strategic. Pick your moment. Don't let them goad you into what? Fighting back? Defending myself? Adrian pulled away. I'm done being strategic, Thomas. I'm done playing by rules that were designed to keep me silent. Tomorrow, I'm telling the truth. All of it. And whatever happens after that, at least I'll know I didn't go down quietly. Crawford looked at me, clearly hoping I'd talk sense into him. He's right, I said. You're both insane. That seems to be the consensus. We went to Blackthorne House to prepare. The staff had already heard about the article. I could see it in their faces, the suspicion that hadn't been there before. Mrs. Henshaw handed me a stack of calling cards from ladies who'd, regretfully, had to cancel their tea invitations. Translation: they wanted nothing to do with the scandal-plagued new Duchess. It started, Adrian said as we looked at the cards, the isolation, the social death. By this time next week, we'll be pariahs. Good. I never liked most of them anyway. He almost smiled. You're taking this remarkably well. What choice do I have? Fall apart? That's what they want, so I'll do the opposite. We spent the evening preparing for the tribunal. Adrian rehearsed his testimony, and I helped him organize the documents into a coherent narrative. It was past midnight when we finally stopped, too exhausted to continue. You should get some sleep, Adrian said. Tomorrow's going to be... A knock at the study door interrupted him. Come in, Adrian called. A footman entered, looking nervous. Your Grace, there's a man here to see you. He says it's urgent, about the tribunal. Who is he? He wouldn't give his name, Your Grace, but he said to tell you he has information about General Cardigan. Adrian and I exchanged glances. Cardigan, the general who'd given the order at Sevastopol, who'd been dead for 3 years. Show him in, Adrian said. The man who entered was military. That was obvious from his bearing, even though he wore civilian clothes. 50s, graying at the temples, with the kind of scars that told stories about battles survived. Your Grace, he bowed slightly. Thank you for seeing me at this hour. My name is Colonel Richard Brennan. I served under your father in the Crimea. I don't remember you, Adrian said carefully. You wouldn't. I was stationed elsewhere during most of the campaign, but I knew what happened at Sevastopol. More importantly, I know why it happened. And you're coming forward now because... Brennan's jaw tightened. Because I'm dying. Cancer. Maybe 3 months left. And I'm tired of carrying secrets that should have been exposed years ago. He pulled out a leather folder, laid it on Adrian's desk. General Cardigan gave that order knowing the intelligence was faulty. He did it because he was being blackmailed by Russian agents who'd gotten hold of certain compromising correspondence. They wanted our artillery position weakened. He complied. 23 men died as a result. The room went completely silent. You're saying Sevastopol was deliberate sabotage, Adrian said slowly. I'm saying Cardigan was a traitor who got good men killed to save his own reputation. And High Command buried it because admitting one of their generals was compromised would have destroyed public confidence in the entire military structure. Brennan tapped the folder. It's all in here. Letters. Bank records showing payments from shell companies traced to Russian intelligence. Testimony from officers who were silenced. Why now? I asked. Why wait until you're dying? Because I was a coward when it mattered. I kept quiet to save my career, my pension, my reputation, and I've lived with that guilt every day since. He looked at Adrian with something like pity. They made you the scapegoat for Cardigan's treason. Let you suffer for his crimes. I can't undo that, but I can give you the ammunition to fight back. Adrian opened the folder with shaking hands. I watched his face as he read, shock, then anger, then something that looked almost like grief. This changes everything, he whispered. It does, Brennan agreed. Present that at the tribunal tomorrow, and you won't just clear your name. You'll expose a conspiracy that goes to the highest levels of military command. They'll fight you, they'll try to discredit you, intimidate you, maybe worse, but you'll have the truth on your side. Why are you helping me? Because someone should. Because those 23 men deserve justice, even if it comes 10 years too late, and because Brennan's voice softened. Your father tried to do the same thing. He knew something was wrong. He was investigating when he died. Adrian's head snapped up. What are you saying? I'm saying your father's heart attack was very convenient timing for people who wanted the investigation stopped. I'm saying maybe it wasn't as natural as the doctors claimed. I'm saying be careful, Your Grace, because the people you're about to expose have already killed to protect themselves. They won't hesitate to do it again. The colonel left as quietly as he'd arrived. Adrian and I sat in the study, the folder of evidence between us, the weight of what we'd just learned crushing down like physical pressure. They might have murdered my father, Adrian said, his voice hollow, to keep him quiet. We don't know that for certain. Don't we? Look at the timing. Look at everything they've done to maintain the lie. Why wouldn't they? I had no answer, because he was right. If these people had sent armed men to Blackthorne Hall, if they'd been willing to threaten and intimidate and destroy reputations, why wouldn't they commit murder? Adrian, I said carefully, if we present this evidence tomorrow, we're painting targets on our backs. Not just for scandal, for actual violence. I know. We could die. I know. Is it worth it? Is exposing this conspiracy worth our lives? He looked at me, and I saw the man I'd married in that Whitechapel tavern, the one who'd finally started to believe in his own innocence, who'd started to hope for something better than just survival. If I don't do this, Adrian said quietly, if I let them silence me the way they silenced my father, then I'm just as much a coward as Brennan was. And I can't live like that anymore. I won't. Then we do it together. Elena, don't. I stood, moved around the desk, took both his hands in mine. Don't tell me to stay safe. Don't tell me to hide while you walk into danger. We're married, for better or worse. This is definitely worse. But I'm not leaving. Adrian pulled me close, wrapped his arms around me in the first real embrace we'd ever shared. I felt his heart racing against my chest, felt the fear and determination warring in him. Thank you, he whispered into my hair. For what? For being brave enough for both of us. We stood there, holding each other in the quiet study, and I realized with startling clarity that somewhere in the chaos of the last few weeks, the transaction had become something real. The arrangement had transformed into partnership, maybe even into something more. I loved him. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt inevitable, like everything had been leading to this moment. Adrian, I started. The window exploded inward. Glass showered across the room. I felt Adrian tackle me to the ground, his body covering mine as something heavy landed on the desk, where we'd been standing seconds before. Fire. A bottle filled with oil and flame, turning Adrian's desk into an inferno in seconds. "Get out!" Adrian shouted, pulling me toward the door. But the hallway was already filling with smoke. I heard screaming from somewhere else in the house. More crashing, more fire. Someone was burning Blackthorne House to the ground, with us inside. Someone was burning Blackthorne House to the ground, with us inside. The smoke was already thick, acrid, burning my throat with every breath. Adrian pulled me toward the door, but flames were spreading faster than seemed possible, climbing the curtains, racing across the wooden floor, consuming everything. "The servant stairs," Adrian shouted over the roar of fire. "This way!" We ran through corridors filling with smoke, my eyes streaming, lungs screaming for clean air. Behind us, I could hear the study collapsing, centuries of documents and history turning to ash in seconds. The evidence. Brennan's folder. Everything we needed for the tribunal. "Adrian, the papers, forget them. We have to get out." But I couldn't forget them. Without that evidence, we had nothing, just our word against the entire military establishment. Just two people claiming conspiracy with no proof. I pulled free of Adrian's grip and ran back toward the inferno. "Elena, no!" I didn't listen. The heat hit me like a physical wall as I reached the study doorway. The desk was completely engulfed, the folder somewhere in that massive flame. But Adrian's father's journal, I'd seen him put it in the safe earlier. The safe mounted in the wall behind the portrait of his mother. The portrait was burning. I grabbed a throw blanket from the hallway, wrapped it around my hands, and tore the portrait down. The metal safe behind it was hot enough to blister skin even through the fabric. My fingers fumbled with the combination Adrian had shown me earlier. Right 3 times to 18, left twice to 47, right once to 9. The safe clicked open. I grabbed the journal and Brennan's folder, somehow miraculously still intact, and ran. Adrian caught me in the hallway, his face white with terror and fury. "Are you insane? You could have died." "But I didn't, and we have the evidence. The evidence doesn't matter if you're dead." There wasn't time to argue. Flames were everywhere now, spreading with unnatural speed. This wasn't just arson. Someone had used accelerant. This was meant to destroy everything, everyone. We found Mrs. Henshaw and 3 other staff members at the main staircase, trapped by fire below and above. "The east wing!" one of the footmen shouted. "There's a balcony! We can climb down!" We ran. My lungs were burning, my vision swimming from smoke inhalation. Adrian kept one hand locked around my wrist, refusing to let me fall behind. Behind us, I heard part of the ceiling collapse with a thunderous crash. The east wing balcony hung 15 feet above the ground, too far to jump without breaking something, but the fire was right behind us. We were out of options. "The trellis!" Mrs. Henshaw gasped, pointing to the wooden structure covered in dead vines running down the side of the building. "It might hold." "It won't hold all of us," Adrian said. "Then we go one at a time, quickly." The footman went first, the trellis creaking ominously under his weight, but holding. Then a maid. Then another. Mrs. Henshaw was next, but she hesitated. "Go," I urged. "Please." She climbed over the railing. The trellis groaned, one of the supports pulling away from the wall, but she made it down. "Your turn," Adrian said to me. "Together." "Elena, I'm not leaving you." We didn't have time to argue. The fire had reached the balcony, flames licking at the doorframe. We went over the railing together, Adrian below me in case I fell. The trellis screamed in protest, the wood splintering under our combined weight. We were halfway down when it gave way. I hit the ground hard, all the air leaving my lungs in a rush. Adrian landed beside me, rolling to absorb the impact. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stare up at Blackthorne House burning against the night sky. "Can you stand?" Adrian asked, his voice rough from smoke. I nodded, though everything hurt. He pulled me up, and we stumbled away from the building just as more windows exploded outward from the heat. The staff had gathered in the courtyard, watching their home burn. Some were crying. Mrs. Henshaw just stood rigid, her face expressionless, but I saw her hands shaking. "Is everyone out?" Adrian demanded, counting heads. "Where's Graves?" "The library," someone said. He was cataloging in the library when it started. Adrian turned back toward the house. No, I grabbed his arm. Adrian, you can't. He's in there because I asked him to help me. I'm not leaving him to die. He pulled free and ran before I could stop him. I watched in horror as he disappeared into the smoke, and for one terrible moment, I thought I'd never see him again. Then two figures emerged, Adrian supporting Graves, who was coughing violently, but alive. You absolute fool, I said when they reached us, though relief made my voice shake. You could have died. Seemed important at the time, Adrian managed, then doubled over, coughing. Fire bells rang in the distance. The village brigade was coming, but it was already too late. Blackthorne Hall, 600 years of history, generations of family heritage, was being consumed before our eyes. And someone had done this deliberately, while we were inside. They tried to kill us, I said quietly. They failed. Adrian's arm came around my shoulders, pulling me close. We're alive. That's what matters. The house is just a building, stone and wood. It can be rebuilt. His grip tightened. You can't be. The fire brigade arrived 20 minutes later, but all they could do was prevent the flames from spreading to the stables and outbuildings. The main house was lost. We stood and watched it burn until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, turning the smoke from black to gray. Your Grace, Mrs. Henshaw said quietly. What do we do now? Adrian looked at his staff, 15 people who'd just lost their employment, their home, everything. People who depended on him. We fight back, he said. We go to London. We present our evidence at the tribunal, and we make sure whoever did this pays for it. Your Grace, the tribunal is today. Graves checked his pocket watch, miraculously still intact. In 4 hours. 4 hours. We had 4 hours to get to London, cleaned up, and present a coherent case against people who just tried to murder us. Then we'd better get moving, Adrian said. We made it to London with 20 minutes to spare. The journey was a nightmare. Filthy, smoke-stained, running on no sleep and pure adrenaline. Crawford met us at the station with fresh clothes and a carriage. What the hell happened? He demanded, staring at our appearance. Someone burned down Blackthorne Hall, Adrian said flatly. While we were inside, Crawford went pale. They're escalating. Adrian, maybe we should postpone the tribunal, regroup. No, we do this today, now, before they have time to make another attempt. You look like you've been through a war. Good. Let them see what their conspiracy cost. The tribunal was being held at the War Office, an imposing building that seemed designed to intimidate. We walked through corridors lined with portraits of stern military men, all of them judging us from their gilded frames. The hearing room was packed. Officers, officials, journalists, everyone who was anyone in London, military and political circles, had turned out for the spectacle. I saw Lord Ashworth in the front row, his face carefully neutral. Beside him sat several men in generals' uniforms, their chests heavy with medals. The accused will stand, the presiding officer announced. Adrian stood. So did I. Duchess, you are not on trial here, the officer began. Then consider me a witness, I interrupted. Whatever concerns my husband concerns me. Murmurs ran through the crowd. The presiding officer, General Matthews, according to the nameplate, frowned but didn't argue. Very well. Major Blackthorne, you are here to answer questions regarding the incident at Sevastopol on October 23, 1854, in which 23 men under your command were killed. How do you plead to charges of negligence and reckless endangerment? Adrian's voice was steady. Not guilty. More murmurs. Ashworth leaned forward in his seat. We have testimony from Sergeant Thorne suggesting you ignored intelligence warnings. Sergeant Thorne was paid to lie, Adrian said, by Lord Ashworth, who wanted revenge for his son's death. Thorne has since recanted that testimony. That's not true, Ashworth jumped to his feet. I never... Sit down, Lord Ashworth, Matthews commanded. You'll have your chance to speak. General Matthews, Adrian continued, I have evidence that changes everything about what happened at Sevastopol. If I may present it to the tribunal? Matthews looked uncertain. This clearly wasn't going according to whatever script had been prepared. What kind of evidence? The original orders from High Command. Proof that I was following direct commands from General Cardigan. Proof that the decision to advance was not mine. The room exploded into noise. Officers shouting, journalists scribbling frantically. Matthews banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! I will have order! It took several minutes for the chaos to die down. Matthews looked furious, but he couldn't refuse to see the evidence without looking like he was participating in a cover-up. Present your evidence, Major. Adrian pulled out his father's journal and Brennan's folder. I watched the generals in the front row, saw the moment they realized what he was holding, saw the flash of panic quickly hidden behind military discipline. This journal belonged to my father, General William Blackthorne. He documented what he learned about Sevastopol, including the fact that I was following orders from General Cardigan, orders that came from high command despite questionable intelligence. He began reading passages aloud. The room went silent, everyone transfixed. This folder contains evidence from Colonel Richard Brennan, evidence that General Cardigan was compromised by Russian intelligence, that he deliberately gave orders knowing they would result in casualties, that Sevastopol was sabotage, not incompetence. That's preposterous, one of the generals shouted. Cardigan was a hero. Cardigan was a traitor, Adrian shot back. And High Command has spent 5 years covering it up. They let me take the blame because it was easier than admitting one of their own betrayed his country. Do you have proof of these accusations? Adrian laid out the documents. Bank records. Letters. Testimony from officers who'd been silenced. It was damning, absolutely damning. Matthews looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. These documents, where did you obtain them? Colonel Brennan brought them to me last night, hours before someone firebombed my home in an attempt to destroy the evidence and kill me. The gas this time were genuine. Even the journalists looked shocked. Someone attacked you? Matthews demanded. Someone burned Blackthorne Hall to the ground while my wife and I were inside, Adrian said. We barely escaped with our lives. The same people who've been threatening witnesses, manipulating the press, and trying to ensure this inquiry reached a predetermined conclusion. That's a serious accusation, Major. I'm aware. I'm also prepared to prove it. I stepped forward, pulling out the notes I'd made during the train ride. General Matthews, I have a list of every threat, every attempt at intimidation, every suspicious incident leading up to this tribunal, including the 3 men who broke into Blackthorne Hall 3 days ago with explicit orders to stop my husband from investigating. Who were these men? They're currently in custody in Yorkshire. I'm sure their employers would be very interested to know they've started talking. It was another bluff. The men hadn't talked yet, but the generals didn't know that. This is outrageous, one of them sputtered. You can't come in here making wild accusations without what? Adrian's voice cut through the protest like a knife. Without evidence? I have evidence. Without witnesses? I have witnesses. The only thing I don't have is the power to make you listen. But I think the press will be very interested in why a tribunal convened to establish truth is so determined to suppress it. Matthews looked at the journalists, many of whom were already writing. This was the story of the decade. Military conspiracy, treason, attempted murder. No amount of pressure would keep it out of the papers now. We'll need time to review this evidence, Matthews said finally. How much time? Several weeks at least. No. Adrian's voice was firm. You have until tomorrow morning. Then I'm releasing everything to the press regardless of what you decide. The public deserves to know the truth. You can't dictate terms to this tribunal. Watch me. Adrian gathered the documents. I've spent 5 years carrying guilt for something that wasn't my fault. 5 years being destroyed by a lie. I'm done waiting for institutions to do the right thing. Either you act or I will. He turned to leave. I followed, and so did half the journalists in the room. We were mobbed in the hallway. Questions shouted from every direction, notebooks thrust forward, photographers trying to get pictures. Is it true Blackthorne Hall was destroyed? Were you really inside when it burned? Can you prove General Cardigan was a traitor? Do you think your father was murdered? Adrian stopped walking, turned to face them directly. I believe my father died trying to expose a conspiracy. I believe 23 good men died because someone in high command prioritized politics over soldiers' lives. And I believe the same people responsible for those deaths tried to kill me last night to prevent the truth from coming out. He paused, making sure every journalist was writing. Tomorrow morning, I'll be releasing all evidence to the public, every document, every testimony, every piece of proof showing exactly what happened at Sevastopol and who's responsible. The tribunal can choose to act, or they can choose to be exposed as complicit. That's their decision. What about Lord Ashworth? Someone shouted. Adrian's expression hardened. Lord Ashworth lost his son at Sevastopol. I understand his grief. I understand his anger. But grief doesn't justify paying witnesses to lie or participating in a conspiracy to suppress truth. If he wants justice for his son, the real culprits are the ones who gave the order that killed him. We pushed through the crowd to Crawford's carriage. The moment the door closed, I felt the adrenaline drain out of me, leaving nothing but exhaustion. That was either brilliant or suicidal, Crawford said from the driver's seat. I can't decide which. Both, probably, Adrian admitted. He looked at me. You were incredible in there. I mostly just stood there. You stood beside me. That mattered more than you know. The carriage took us to a hotel. Crawford's idea, since Blackthorne House in London wasn't secure. We needed somewhere safe while everything played out. The room was small but clean. I collapsed on the bed, every muscle aching from the night's ordeal. Adrian sat beside me, still holding the folder of evidence like it might disappear if he let go. Do you think they'll actually investigate? I asked. I think we force their hand. If they don't, and we release everything to the press, they'll look complicit in the cover-up. Either way, the truth comes out. And if they try to discredit us, call us liars, then we keep fighting, keep pushing, keep refusing to be silent. He set down the folder and took my hand. Elena, about last night, about you running back into the fire. Don't tell me it was stupid. I know it was stupid. I was going to say it was brave, reckless and terrifying, but brave. His thumb traced circles on my palm. You saved the evidence, probably saved our case, even though it could have cost you everything. It would have cost us everything if I hadn't. The evidence was all we had. No. Adrian's voice was soft. We had each other. That would have been enough. I looked at him, really looked at him. The soot still smudged on his face, the burns on his hands from pulling graves out of the fire, the exhaustion carved into every line. This man who'd spent 5 years punishing himself, who'd built walls so high he couldn't see over them, who'd told me on our wedding night that I'd never have his heart. Adrian. A knock at the door interrupted. Crawford's voice. You need to see this. Adrian opened the door. Crawford held out a newspaper, the evening edition, still warm from the press. The headline read, Duke exposes military conspiracy. Sevastopol massacre was deliberate sabotage. Below it, a detailed account of everything that had happened at the tribunal. Quotes from Adrian. Descriptions of the evidence. Even a mention of the attack on Blackthorne Hall. That was fast, I said. The Times wanted the story before anyone else could run it. They've been sitting on suspicions about Sevastopol for years, but couldn't prove anything. Now they can. Crawford grinned. By tomorrow morning, this will be in every paper in England. There's no suppressing it now. Adrian read the article twice, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. It's happening, he said quietly. The truth is actually coming out. There'll be consequences, Crawford warned. People you've implicated won't go down quietly. They'll fight back. Let them. I'm not backing down. Good. Because you've got a visitor downstairs. Says it's urgent. Who? Sergeant Thorne. We found Thorne in the hotel lobby, looking nervous and exhausted. He stood when we approached, twisting his cap in his hands. Your Grace, I saw the papers, heard what you said at the tribunal. He swallowed hard. I want to testify. For real this time. Tell them what actually happened, what I was paid to lie about. Ashworth won't be happy about that, Adrian said. Don't care. I can't keep living with what I did. Lying about those men, about what really happened. They deserve better. Lieutenant Ashworth deserved better. Thorne's voice cracked. I was there when he died, Your Grace. He wasn't angry at you. He knew you were following orders. His last words were asking me to make sure the truth came out. And I failed him, but maybe I can fix that now. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Thank you, Sergeant. Thorne shook it, tears running down his weathered face. The tribunal reconvened the next morning. This time the room was even more packed. Standing room only, with journalists fighting for space and people lined up outside hoping to get in. The story had exploded overnight, every paper in London running variations of the same headline, each one more damning than the last. General Matthews looked like he hadn't slept. Neither had we, but at least we had the satisfaction of knowing we'd won. This tribunal has reviewed the evidence presented by Major Blackthorne, Matthews announced. We have also taken testimony from Sergeant Thorne and reviewed additional documentation provided by Colonel Brennan before his death last night. My heart stuttered. Brennan's dead? Adrian's hand found mine under the table, squeezed hard. Colonel Brennan passed away early this morning from complications of his illness, Matthews continued. But before he died, he provided a sworn affidavit confirming everything in his previous statement. The tribunal has no choice but to conclude that the incident at Sevastopol was not the result of Major Blackthorne's negligence, but rather the result of compromised intelligence and orders from high command. The room erupted. Matthews had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Furthermore, he continued once the noise died down, evidence suggests that General Cardigan was acting under duress from foreign agents. While this does not excuse his actions, it changes the nature of culpability. Major Blackthorne is hereby cleared of all charges. His military record will be amended to reflect the true circumstances of the Sevastopol incident. I felt Adrian's entire body sag with relief. As for the broader conspiracy, Matthews's voice hardened. An investigation has been opened into allegations of cover-up and obstruction of justice. Several officers have been placed on administrative leave pending further inquiry. This tribunal recognizes that Major Blackthorne and his family have suffered tremendous injustice over the past 5 years. Nothing we do here today can fully address that, but we can ensure the truth is known. He looked directly at Adrian. On behalf of the British Army and the Crown, I apologize for the failures that led to your wrongful persecution. You served with honor. The deaths at Sevastopol were not your fault. The words hung in the air. Adrian stood slowly, like he didn't quite trust his legs. Thank you, General. Don't thank me. Thank your wife. Matthews actually smiled, small and brief. She's the one who wouldn't let you give up. We left the tribunal to applause. Actual applause from the observers, from journalists, from officers who'd known all along something was wrong but hadn't had the courage to speak up. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Word had spread about the verdict. People wanted to see the Duke who'd stood up to the military establishment and won. Speech! Someone shouted. Adrian looked panicked. Public speaking had never been his strength. I squeezed his hand. Tell them the truth, I whispered. He took a breath and addressed the crowd. 5 years ago, 23 men died at Sevastopol. They were soldiers, fathers, sons, brothers. Their deaths were blamed on command failure, on negligence, on mistakes made in the heat of battle. His voice grew stronger. But the real failure was in the people who gave orders knowing they'd result in casualties, who then covered up their crimes by making scapegoats of the survivors. Those men deserved better. They deserved a military that valued their lives more than political convenience. The crowd had gone silent, hanging on every word. Today the truth came out, not because powerful people decided to do the right thing, but because ordinary people refused to let it stay buried. People like Colonel Brennan, who found the courage to speak up even knowing it would cost him. Like Sergeant Thorne, who chose honesty over money. Like my wife. He looked at me, and the emotion in his eyes made my breath catch. Who stood beside me when she had every reason to walk away. He turned back to the crowd. Justice delayed is justice denied. But it's never too late for truth. Remember that. And when you see injustice, when you see people being silenced or scapegoated or destroyed for political convenience, speak up, fight back, because silence protects the guilty and punishes the innocent. The crowd erupted into cheers. We made it to the carriage through a sea of well-wishers, people wanting to shake Adrian's hand, to congratulate us, to share their own stories of military injustice now that someone had finally broken the silence. Crawford drove us away from the chaos, and we sat in stunned silence as the reality sank in. It's over, I said finally. The tribunal is, Adrian agreed, but the investigation's just beginning. They'll be unraveling this conspiracy for months. Good. Let them. I leaned against his shoulder, too tired to sit up straight anymore. We did it. You did it. I would have given up a dozen times if you hadn't pushed me to keep fighting. That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? Pushing each other to be better than we think we can be. Adrian's arm came around me. I told you on our wedding night that you'd never have my heart. My chest tightened. I remember. I was wrong. His voice was rough with emotion. You have it, completely. I don't know when it happened. Maybe in that tavern in Whitechapel, maybe when you ran back into the fire. Maybe it's been happening gradually this whole time. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being a transaction and became real. I lifted my head to look at him. Adrian, I love you, Elena. I'm terrified of it. Terrified of losing you the way I lost everyone else. But I love you anyway. The words I'd been holding back spilled out. I love you too. I have for weeks, maybe longer. I just didn't know if you'd ever be ready to hear it. He kissed me then. Not the perfunctory press of lips from our wedding, but a real kiss, deep and desperate and full of everything we'd been through together, everything we'd survived. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against mine. What do we do now? He asked. We rebuild. Blackthorne Hall, our lives, our marriage. We turn this arrangement into something real. It's already real. Then we make it last. The carriage took us to Crawford's townhouse, where he'd insisted we stay until we figured out more permanent arrangements. Inside, we found Mrs. Henshaw and the rest of the Blackthorne Hall staff, all looking exhausted but alive. Your Grace! Mrs. Henshaw stood quickly. We heard about the tribunal, the verdict. All charges dismissed, Adrian confirmed. The truth is out. The relief on everyone's faces was palpable. These people had stood by us through everything, the scandal, the attacks, the fire. They deserved to know it hadn't been for nothing. What about the estate? Someone asked. Blackthorne Hall? Adrian looked at me. I nodded. We rebuild, he said firmly. It'll take time and money, but we rebuild. That house has stood for 600 years. It'll stand for 600 more. And all of you will have positions there when it's finished. You have my word. Mrs. Henshaw actually smiled. Then we'd better get started, Your Grace. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. The investigation into the Sevastopol cover-up expanded rapidly. 3 generals were forced to resign. Dozens of officers were questioned. Lord Ashworth was cleared of direct involvement in the original conspiracy, but faced charges related to witness tampering and attempted extortion. He came to see us one evening, looking older and more broken than I'd ever seen him. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. Both of you. What I did, trying to destroy you, paying Thorne to lie. It was wrong. It won't bring my son back. It just added more victims to Cardigan's crimes. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Your son died a hero, Lord Ashworth. The official record will now reflect that. He followed orders just like the rest of us. He deserves to be remembered that way. Ashworth's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. That's all I ever wanted. For people to know James died honorably. He did. They all did. After Ashworth left, Adrian and I stood at the window watching rain fall over London. The same rain that had been falling the day we married. But everything else had changed. Do you regret it? I asked. Agreeing to marry me? Adrian turned to face me fully. That's the only decision I've made in the last 5 years that I don't regret. You saved me, Elena. Not just from the conspiracy or the tribunal, you saved me from myself. We saved each other. Yes, we did. He pulled me close, and we stood there in comfortable silence. Partners, equals. Something far better than either of us had expected when we walked down that aisle in the rain. Outside, the city moved on. The newspapers had new scandals to report. Society had new gossip to whisper about. The world kept turning. But inside this moment, we'd found something rare, something worth fighting for. We'd found home in each other. And that was worth every battle, every scar, every moment of fear and uncertainty. Because we'd emerged from the fire together, stronger than before, ready to face whatever came next. Ready to face whatever came next. What came next was winter. It arrived early that year, sweeping down from the north with a fury that turned London's streets into sheets of ice and froze the Thames solid for the first time in decades. The city ground to a halt, shops closing early, carriages abandoned as horses refused to navigate the treacherous roads. Adrian and I had moved into Crawford's townhouse temporarily while we sorted out what to do about Blackthorne Hall. The insurance investigators had finished their work, arson, they'd concluded, though the culprits were still unknown. We all knew that meant the people responsible were too well connected to prosecute, but at least the payout would fund rebuilding. I was reviewing architectural plans in the study when Mrs. Henshaw knocked. "Your Grace, there's someone here to see you. A Mr. Pemberton from the Builders Guild." "Send him in." The man who entered was weathered and practical-looking, with calloused hands and the kind of squint that came from years of reading construction plans in poor light. "Your Grace," he bowed slightly. "I've been reviewing the damage assessment from Blackthorne Hall. I wanted to discuss the reconstruction timeline." "Please sit. What are we looking at?" Pemberton spread out drawings on the desk. "The structure's sound. Those old walls are built to last, but the interior's a total loss. We're talking 18 months minimum to restore it properly. Maybe 2 years if we want to modernize the plumbing and heating." 2 years? I'd expected it to be bad, but hearing the number made it real. Could be faster if we cut corners, but I wouldn't recommend it. A house like that deserves to be done right. "I agree. What about cost?" He named a figure that made my stomach drop. Even with the insurance payout, we'd be stretched thin. Adrian's wealth was substantial, but it wasn't infinite, and we had staff to pay, the London house to maintain, investments to manage. "I'll need to discuss this with my husband," I said. "Of course, Your Grace, but I'll need an answer soon if you want us to start in the spring. Projects like this book up fast." After he left, I sat staring at the numbers, trying to make them work. We could afford it, barely. But it would mean selling some properties, liquidating certain investments. Adrian wouldn't like it. Those holdings had been in his family for generations. "Bad news?" I looked up. Adrian stood in the doorway, still in his coat from whatever meeting he'd been attending. The tribunal's aftermath had kept him busy, giving depositions, meeting with investigators, helping identify other cases where soldiers might have been wrongly blamed for command failures. "Depends on your definition. The rebuilding will take 2 years and cost more than the insurance will cover." He came to look at the plans. "How much more?" I showed him the figures, watched his jaw tighten. "We can do it," he said finally. "We'll sell the hunting lodge in Scotland, maybe the townhouse in Bath. Neither of us use them anyway." "Adrian, those properties have been in your family for generations." "I know, but they're just property. Blackthorne Hall is home." He looked at me. "Besides, I'm more interested in building something new than preserving something old." "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about what to do with the estate once it's rebuilt. It's too big for just the two of us. Too much space sitting empty while people in the villages around it are struggling." I waited, curious where he was going. "What if we turn part of it into a school? For children whose families can't afford education. We've got the land, we'll have the buildings. And after everything that happened with Sevastopol, with good people being crushed by systems that don't care about them, I want to do something that actually helps." The idea was so unexpected, so unlike the cold man I'd married, that I just stared at him. "You think it's foolish," Adrian said, misreading my silence. "I think it's brilliant, and I want to help." His face brightened. "Really? Really? We could start small, maybe 20 students the first year, hire good teachers, provide housing for those who need it." My mind was already racing with possibilities. "We could focus on children from military families too. The ones whose fathers died or were injured in service. Give them opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise." "Elena," Adrian's voice was thick with emotion. "That's perfect." We spent the next hour sketching out ideas, building on each other's thoughts, getting more excited as the plan took shape. This was what we could do with our privilege, our wealth, our position. Not just preserve the past, but create a different future. "We should tell the staff," Adrian said. Give them the option to be part of it. Mrs. Palmer could help run the school. Graves could manage the library. You think they'd want to? I think they'd jump at the chance. None of them chose to work at Blackthorne Hall just for the salary. They stayed because they believed in what the estate represented. Now we're giving them a chance to make it represent something better. He was right. When we called a staff meeting that evening and explained the plan, the response was overwhelming. Mrs. Henshaw actually cried. Graves immediately started making lists of books they'd need. Even the younger staff members who'd lost everything in the fire seemed energized by the idea of building something meaningful from the ashes. This is good, Crawford said later, after everyone had dispersed. Gives people purpose beyond just rebuilding. It gives us purpose too, I admitted. I've spent my whole life feeling useless, like I was just ornamental. This is a chance to actually matter. You've always mattered, Elena. You just needed the right stage to prove it. Winter deepened. December brought snow that piled up in drifts higher than my head. London became a different city, quieter, slower, beautiful in its frozen stillness. Adrian and I spent most of our time indoors, planning the school, managing the investigation's fallout, and slowly learning how to actually be married. It wasn't always smooth. You can't just make decisions without consulting me, I snapped one evening after discovering he'd sold the Scottish hunting lodge without mentioning it. I was handling estate business. That's my responsibility. Your responsibility? We're supposed to be partners, Adrian. That means actually partnering, not just telling me after the fact. He looked genuinely confused. I was trying to spare you the burden of, I don't want to be spared. I want to be included. There's a difference. We stared at each other across the table, tension crackling between us. You're right, Adrian said finally. I'm sorry. I'm still learning how to do this. How to share responsibility instead of carrying everything alone. Then learn faster, because I'm not going to be the decorative wife who smiles and nods while you make all the actual decisions. I don't want you to be. Then stop acting like you do. He came around the table, took my hands. I'm sorry, truly. It's just, I spent 5 years alone, making every decision by myself because there was no one else to trust. It's hard to break that habit. I know, but you have to try. Because if this marriage is going to work, we have to actually work together. I will. I promise. And he did try. It wasn't perfect. Old habits died hard, but he started including me in everything. Estate decisions, investment choices, even the boring administrative details he used to handle alone. We made mistakes, we argued, but we learned. On Christmas Eve, a package arrived from Lord Ashworth. Inside was a portrait, small, beautifully rendered, of a young man in military uniform. Lieutenant James Ashworth, according to the inscription. The accompanying note was brief. Your Grace and Duchess, thank you for giving me back my son's honor. This is my only remaining portrait of him. I thought perhaps it could hang in your school so the children there remember why education matters, why truth matters, why having the courage to stand up to injustice can change the world. With gratitude and deepest apology, Ashworth. Adrian stared at the portrait for a long time, his fingers tracing the frame. We'll give him a place of honor, he said quietly, in the main hall, so every student who walks through those doors sees him. He'd like that. Yes, he would. We hung the portrait in Crawford's study for now, a promise of what would come when Blackthorne Hall rose again. What? January brought the final tribunal findings. The military investigation had uncovered far more than just Sevastopol. Years of cover-ups, scapegoating, officers protecting each other while destroying subordinates. The scandal consumed the War Office. Reforms were demanded. Heads rolled. Adrian was called to testify before Parliament. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked the night before. You've already given them everything. You don't owe them more testimony. It's not about what I owe them. It's about making sure this never happens again, that no other soldier gets blamed for his superior's failures. The parliamentary hearing was even more packed than the tribunal had been. Adrian spoke for 3 hours straight, detailing not just Sevastopol but the entire system that had enabled the cover-up. He named names, provided documentation, refused to be intimidated by the powerful men who didn't want their crimes exposed. When he finished, the chamber was silent. Then one member of Parliament stood and started clapping. Then another. Then another, until the entire chamber was on its feet, applauding the Duke who'd refused to stay silent. The newspapers called it the most important military testimony in a generation. The Queen herself sent a letter, brief and formal, but acknowledging that Adrian had served with honor and deserved better than the treatment he'd received. "It's official," Crawford said, reading the letter over Adrian's shoulder. "You're a national hero." "I'm not a hero, I'm just someone who refused to keep lying." "That's what heroes do, you idiot. They stand up when everyone else sits down." Adrian looked uncomfortable with the label, but he didn't argue further. February brought unexpected news. I'd been feeling ill for weeks. Nothing serious, just persistent nausea and exhaustion I'd attributed to stress. Mrs. Henshaw finally insisted I see a doctor. Dr. Whitmore was an older woman with kind eyes and no-nonsense manner. She examined me thoroughly, asked pointed questions, then sat back with a knowing smile. "Your Grace, when was your last monthly?" I had to think. "November, I believe? Everything's been so chaotic I haven't been paying attention." I stopped, understanding dawning. "Oh, indeed. I'd estimate you're about 3 months along. The baby should arrive late summer." A baby. I was pregnant. The doctor gave me instructions about diet and rest, warned me about certain activities to avoid, and sent me home with a list of things to prepare. I barely heard any of it. I was going to be a mother. Adrian would be a father. The child he'd married me to produce was actually happening. I found him in Crawford's library, reviewing construction contracts. He looked up when I entered, and whatever he saw in my face made him set down his papers immediately. "What's wrong? Are you ill? Should I call the doctor?" "I already saw the doctor." He went pale. Is it serious?" "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between us. Adrian just stared at me, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that might have been terror before settling on cautious joy. "Pregnant," he repeated. "About 3 months. Due late summer." He stood slowly, crossed to where I was standing, and placed his hand gently on my still flat stomach, like he was trying to feel something that wasn't visible yet. "A baby," he whispered. "Yes. Our baby." "Yes." His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm terrified." "Me too. Catherine, she died. They both died. What if—" "Adrian." I covered his hand with mine. "I'm not Catherine. And this isn't the same situation. Dr. Whitmore says I'm healthy. Everything looks normal. We'll be careful, we'll take precautions, but we can't live our lives being afraid of what might happen. I can't lose you." "You won't. You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll fight to stay. That I'll do everything possible to survive this and be here for you and our child." I pulled his hand up to my heart. "We've survived assassination attempts and fires and conspiracies. We can survive childbirth too." He pulled me close, burying his face in my hair. I felt him shaking, whether from fear or joy or both, I couldn't tell. "I love you," he said, muffled against my shoulder. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "I love you too. And we're going to be fine, all 3 of us." We stood there holding each other, while outside the window snow continued to fall on London, and somewhere far to the north, Blackthorne Hall waited to be reborn. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, green shoots pushed through frozen ground. London shook off winter's grip and came alive again. And in Yorkshire, construction began on Blackthorne Hall. We traveled north in April to oversee the work. The journey was harder than before. I was showing now, my belly rounding with the baby growing inside, but I refused to stay in London while Adrian went alone. "You're supposed to be resting," he fretted as the carriage bounced over rutted roads. "I'm pregnant, not dying. Stop treating me like I'm made of glass." "You're carrying our child. That makes you precious cargo. Your romantic declarations need work." But I was smiling. And so was he. Blackthorne Hall looked different in daylight, without flames consuming it. The walls still stood, blackened and damaged but solid. New timber was already being raised, craftsmen swarming over the skeleton like ants rebuilding their nest. "Mister," Pemberton met us in what used to be the main courtyard. Your Grace, Your Grace, he nodded to each of us. Right on schedule. We've stabilized the structure and started on the interior framing. Another month and we'll be ready for the finish work. What about the school wing? I asked. Breaking ground next week. 10 classrooms, a library, dormitories for up to 50 students. It'll be state-of-the-art when we're finished. Adrian looked at me, and I saw the pride in his eyes. This was really happening. The dream we'd sketched out on paper was becoming real. We walked through the construction site, careful of our footing, imagining what it would look like when finished. Not just a restoration of what had been, but something new, something better. The children are going to love it here, I said, standing in what would become the library. All this space to learn and grow. We'll need to hire teachers soon. Start advertising for students. Already done. Mrs. Palmer's been corresponding with families in the villages. We have 40 applications, and we haven't even officially opened yet. Adrian laughed. Of course you have. You've been planning this for months. Someone has to keep this project moving forward. I'm not complaining. You're brilliant at this. We spent 3 days in Yorkshire, meeting with contractors, making decisions about finishes and fixtures, walking the grounds and dreaming about the future. It felt like we were building more than just a building. We were building a life, a legacy. On our last night, we stood on the temporary scaffolding overlooking the construction site. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and pink. My father would have loved this, Adrian said quietly, turning the estate into something that actually helps people instead of just preserving tradition. He'd be proud of you. I hope so. I spent so many years thinking I disappointed him, thinking he died ashamed of me. Finding out he'd been fighting for me all along, his voice caught. I wish I could thank him. He knows. Wherever he is, he knows. We watched the sun disappear behind the moors, the sky turning deep purple studded with early stars. Below us, the workers were packing up for the night, their voices carrying on the wind. Are you scared? I asked. About the baby? Terrified, but also excited. Hopeful. Adrian's hand found mine. I spent 5 years convinced I didn't deserve happiness, that I was too damaged, too broken, but you changed that. You made me believe I could be more than my worst moments. You were always more. You just needed permission to believe it. Will you give me permission to be terrified about being a father? Only if you give me permission to be terrified about being a mother. Deal. We kissed as the stars came out, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely at peace. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. Not because we'd solved all our problems, we hadn't. But because we were facing them together. And that made all the difference. Summer arrived with heat that made London unbearable. We'd returned to the city in May for various social obligations. Adrian was now in demand for everything from political committees to charity events, his reputation completely rehabilitated. The Duke who'd exposed military corruption was London's darling, which he found both amusing and exhausting. Another invitation, he said, reading the mail. Lady Pemberton wants us for dinner next week. Decline. I'm enormous and uncomfortable and in no mood to make small talk with people who wouldn't speak to us 6 months ago. I was 8 months pregnant now, moving slowly, sleeping poorly, ready for this to be over. Dr. Whitmore had ordered me to rest, which I was trying to do despite having opinions about every decision being made regarding the school. Mrs. Palmer sent the final teacher selections, Adrian said, changing the subject. We've got 5 confirmed, all with excellent credentials. The head teacher is a woman, Miss Sarah Brennan. Any relation to the colonel, you think? His daughter, according to her letter. She wants to honor her father's memory by being part of this. That's... Adrian's voice went rough. That's good. He'd like that. July brought the final parliamentary reforms. The Military Accountability Act passed with overwhelming support. New protections for soldiers, new oversight for command decisions, new procedures for investigating military failures. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Adrian was invited to the signing ceremony. Come with me, he said. I'm 8.5 months pregnant. I can barely walk across a room without stopping to catch my breath. Please, I want you there. You're as responsible for this as I am. So I went, uncomfortable and waddling and utterly exhausted. But I watched as the act was signed into law, watched as the Prime Minister publicly acknowledged Adrian's role in exposing the corruption that made it necessary, and felt a fierce pride that had nothing to do with duty or obligation. We'd done this. Together. Changed something fundamental about how the military treated its people. Afterward, journalists wanted interviews, politicians wanted photographs. Adrian politely declined everything and took me home. "You should have stayed," I said in the carriage. "Enjoyed your moment." "My moment is sitting beside me, carrying our child. Everything else is just noise." I squeezed his hand, too tired to argue. The baby came on August 15th, 3 weeks early, during the worst thunderstorm London had seen in years. The labor was long, 18 hours of pain that made me understand exactly why Adrian had been so terrified. Dr. Whitmore stayed the entire time, calm and competent, while Adrian held my hand and looked like he might be sick. "You're doing wonderfully," the doctor kept saying, which felt like a lie when every contraction made me want to scream. "I can't," I gasped at one point. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can." Adrian's voice was firm despite the fear in his eyes. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." "Easy for you to say." "Push, Your Grace," Dr. Whitmore interrupted. "The baby's almost here." I pushed and pushed and pushed until I thought I might die from the effort. And then, a cry. Sharp and indignant and absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," Dr. Whitmore announced, holding up a tiny, squalling creature covered in blood and vernix. "A healthy boy." She cleaned him quickly and placed him on my chest. I stared down at this impossible thing, this tiny human who was somehow part me and part Adrian and entirely himself. "Hello," I whispered, touching his miniature fingers. "Hello, little one." Adrian was crying, actual tears streaming down his face as he looked at our son. "He's perfect," he managed. "Elena, he's perfect." "He is." Dr. Whitmore gave us a few minutes, then took the baby to examine him properly while she tended to me. Everything had gone well, she assured us. Mother and baby, both healthy. "What are we going to name him?" I asked when we were finally alone, the baby sleeping peacefully in Adrian's arms. "I was thinking, William, after my father, but only if you agree." William, the man who'd fought for his son even when Adrian didn't know it, who'd died trying to expose the truth. "William Brennan Blackthorne," I said, "to honor both men who helped us." Adrian looked down at our son. "William Brennan Blackthorne, welcome to the world, little one. We promise to do better by you than the world did by us." September brought the official opening of Blackthorne Hall Academy. We decided to call it an academy instead of just a school. It sounded more prestigious, more like something that could compete with the established institutions. The first class of 40 students arrived with everything from eager excitement to terrified nervousness. Miss Brennan was everything we'd hoped for, firm but kind, brilliant but accessible. She'd organized the curriculum, hired additional staff, and had the whole operation running smoothly within a week. Adrian and I attended the opening ceremony, baby William bundled in my arms. He was 6 weeks old now, alert and curious, taking in everything with wide gray eyes that matched his father's. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adrian addressed the gathered students, parents, and staff. "Welcome to Blackthorne Hall Academy. This school exists because good people refused to accept injustice, because they fought for truth even when it was dangerous, because they believe the next generation deserves better than the mistakes of the past." He gestured to Lieutenant Ashworth's portrait, now hanging in the main hall as promised. "This young man died serving his country. He died because powerful people made bad decisions and then tried to hide their failures. This academy exists to honor his memory and the memory of all those who've been failed by systems that should have protected them. We're here to give you the education, the tools, and the courage to challenge injustice when you see it, to stand up for truth, to be better than those who came before." The students applauded. Their parents looked moved, and I felt a fierce pride in what we'd built from literal ashes. After the ceremony, we walked the grounds. The estate looked beautiful, not just restored but improved. Modern plumbing, better heating, classrooms filled with light, and books and promise. Your father would be proud, I told Adrian, shifting William to my other arm. I hope so. He looked at the students running across the lawns, already making friends, already beginning their education. I hope we're all doing something he'd approve of. We are. We're breaking cycles, creating opportunities, making sure the next generation doesn't have to fight the same battles we did. William chose that moment to start fussing. Adrian took him, rocking him gently while making ridiculous cooing sounds that would have been embarrassing if they weren't so endearing. What do you think, William? Do you approve of your parents' grand experiment? The baby grabbed Adrian's finger and tried to put it in his mouth. I'll take that as a yes, Adrian said, laughing. Then, winter returned, but it was softer this time. The academy was thriving. 40 students had become 50 as word spread about the quality of education being offered. Miss Brennan had started a scholarship fund to help more families afford tuition. The teachers Adrian and I had hired were passionate and dedicated. We split our time between London and Yorkshire now, enough time in the city to manage Adrian's various responsibilities, enough time at the estate to stay involved with the academy and watch our son grow. William was 4 months old, already trying to roll over, making gurgling sounds that weren't quite words but felt like communication anyway. Adrian was completely besotted, spending hours just watching him sleep or play. He smiled at me today, Adrian announced one evening, looking ridiculously proud. He's been smiling for weeks. Not at me, but today he looked right at me and smiled. A real smile, not just gas. I hid my own smile. That's very significant. It is! Mrs. Henshaw appeared in the doorway. Your Grace, there's a letter from the palace. We exchanged glances. Mail from the palace was never casual. Adrian opened it while I tried not to hover anxiously. His eyes widened as he read. What is it? The Queen wants to honor me for the military reforms. She's awarding me the Order of Merit. The Order of Merit was one of the highest civilian honors in England, reserved for people who'd made exceptional contributions to society. Adrian, that's incredible. It says the ceremony's next month, and he looked up, face strange. She's specifically requesting you attend. Wants to thank you personally for your role in exposing the corruption. I'd met the Queen exactly once, at a formal reception years ago when my father was still pretending to be respectable. She'd been distant, regal, utterly intimidating. I don't know what to say. Say yes. We've earned this, Elena, both of us. The ceremony was held at Buckingham Palace on a cold January morning. We left William with Mrs. Henshaw, who promised to guard him with her life, and made the journey to London dressed in our finest. The palace was as overwhelming as I remembered, all gilt in marble and portraits of stern monarchs. We waited in an anteroom with dozens of other people being honored for various achievements. Nervous? Adrian asked. Terrified. You? Same. When our names were called, we walked into the throne room together. The Queen sat on a raised dais, looking exactly as regal as her portrait suggested. Courtiers and officials lined the walls. Major Adrian Blackthorne, Duke of Blackthorne, the Lord Chamberlain announced, for exceptional service in exposing military corruption and advancing the cause of justice. Adrian stepped forward and knelt. The Queen placed the medal around his neck herself. Your courage has saved lives, Duke Blackthorne, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. The reforms you helped enact will protect soldiers for generations. The Crown is grateful. Thank you, Your Majesty, but I couldn't have done it alone. He looked back at me. The Queen followed his gaze. Duchess Blackthorne, please step forward. My heart hammered as I approached and curtsied. We understand you played no small role in your husband's victory, the Queen said, that you stood beside him when others would have fled, that you risked your own life to help expose the truth. I only did what was right, Your Majesty. Many people know what is right. Few have the courage to act on it. She nodded to the Lord Chamberlain, who came forward with a small velvet box. We would like to present you with the Royal Victorian Order for services to the Crown and to justice. She pinned the medal to my dress herself. It felt surreal. The Queen of England honoring me. Elena Whitford, from a disgraced family with nothing but debts and shame, now recognized for actually mattering. Thank you, Your Majesty, I managed. No, Duchess, thank you. And thank you both for what you're doing with the Academy. Education is perhaps the most powerful weapon against injustice. You're arming the next generation well. We left the palace in a daze, clutching our medals, barely believing what had just happened. Did that really just happen? I asked as our carriage pulled away. I think so. Unless we're both hallucinating. The Queen thanked me, personally. You deserved it. You deserve everything. Adrian pulled me close, and we sat in comfortable silence as London passed by outside the windows. The city that had once felt like a prison now felt like home. Spring came again, and with it, William's first birthday. We celebrated at Blackthorne Hall, surrounded by family. Not blood family, but the family we'd built. Crawford, Mrs. Henshaw, Graves, Miss Brennan, the teachers, even some of the students who'd become like younger siblings to us. William demolished his cake with enthusiastic chaos, getting more on himself than in his mouth. Adrian tried to clean him up while I took photographs with the new camera Crawford had given us. He's going to be trouble, Crawford predicted, watching William grab fistfuls of frosting. He's already trouble, Adrian said fondly. But he's our trouble. Later, after the guests had left and William was asleep, Adrian and I walked through the Academy's main hall. Student artwork covered the walls. Academic achievements were posted on bulletin boards. The library Graves had built was filled with children reading. Remember when this was just an idea? I said. When we were sitting in Crawford's study sketching plans and hoping it might work? I remember thinking you were crazy for believing in it. And now? Now I think you're a visionary who saw what this place could become when all I saw was ashes. We stopped in front of Lieutenant Ashworth's portrait. Someone had placed fresh flowers beneath it. Students did that sometimes, honoring the young man who died too soon. He'd be 29 now, Adrian said quietly. If he'd lived, maybe married, maybe with children of his own. We can't change what happened to him, but we can make sure his death meant something. Do you think we have? Made it mean something? I looked around at the Academy, at the evidence of lives being changed, futures being built, cycles being broken. Yes, I do. Adrian's arm came around my waist, pulling me close. I love you. Have I told you that today? Twice, but I don't mind hearing it again. I love you, and I'm grateful every single day that you refused to give up on me when I'd given up on myself. Someone had to fight for you. Might as well be your wife. We stood there in the quiet hall, surrounded by everything we'd built together, and I thought about how far we'd come. From a transaction to a partnership, from strangers to lovers, from survival to actually living. The journey hadn't been smooth. It had been messy and terrifying and painful. But it had been ours. And standing there with Adrian, knowing our son slept safely upstairs and students slept safely in the dormitories, and we'd actually managed to turn tragedy into something good, I wouldn't change a single moment, because the hard moments had made us who we were. And who we were was enough. More than enough. We were survivors who'd become builders, fighters who'd become healers, two broken people who'd somehow made each other whole. Outside, spring rain began to fall, gentle this time, nourishing instead of punishing, washing the world clean, making way for new growth. Adrian took my hand and we walked back through the halls we'd rebuilt, toward the life we'd created, toward the future we'd fought so hard to claim. Together. Always together. And that was everything.